In the beginning, there was chaos. Not the disorder and confusion that modern minds associate with the word, but rather a vast gaping void, an infinite chasm of nothingness that preceded all existence. This primordial state represented the absence of form, substance, and meaning, a boundless emptiness that contained within it the potential for all creation. From this fundamental void emerged the first conscious entities, being so ancient and powerful that they would shape the very foundations of reality itself. The first to manifest from chaos was Gaia, the earth herself. Unlike later anthropomorphic deities, Gaia existed as both a conscious entity in the physical world, her body forming the solid ground upon which all life would eventually flourish. Her emergence marked the first instance of order imposing itself upon the primordial void, creating a stable foundation for existence. Gaia possessed an inherent fertility and creative power that would drive much of the subsequent cosmic development, her maternal nature extending to all living things that would spring from her fertile soil. Simultaneously with Gaia's emergence came Tartarus, a primordial deity who embodied the deepest, most remote regions beneath the earth. Tartarus existed as both a conscious being and a place, a prison realm located as far below Hades as the heavens were above the earth. This primordial entity served as the cosmic dungeon where the most dangerous beings would eventually be confined, his very existence representing the necessity of boundaries and punishment in the ordered universe. The relationship between Gaia and Tartarus established the fundamental duality between the life-giving surface world and the punishing depths below. Eros also emerged from chaos during this initial phase of creation, though this primordial love bore little resemblance to the later Olympian deity of the same name. This ancient Eros represented the fundamental force of attraction and procreation that would drive all subsequent creation, the cosmic principle that compelled beings to unite and generate new life. Without this primordial force, the universe would have remained static and barren, populated only by the initial entities with no capacity for growth or change. Eros's influence permeated every aspect of creation, ensuring that the cosmos would be dynamic and ever-expanding rather than fixed and lifeless. From the depths of chaos also came Erebus, the personification of primordial darkness. This entity represented not merely the absence of light, but the fundamental darkness that existed before illumination was even conceivable. Erebus controlled the deep shadows that lay beneath the earth and the darkness of the furthest reaches of the cosmos, serving as the counterpoint to any future light that might emerge. His presence established darkness as a fundamental component of reality, rather than merely the absence of something else. Nyx, the primordial night, emerged as one of the most powerful and respected entities from chaos. She commanded not just the darkness of nighttime, but the cosmic principle of night itself. Travelling across the sky in a chariot drawn by black horses, bringing rest and dreams to mortals and immortals alike. Nyx possessed such ancient authority that even Zeus would later show her deference, recognizing her primordial status and the essential nature of her domain. Her dark robes, studded with stars, covered the earth each evening, providing the necessary respite from the activities of day and creating the cyclical pattern that would govern all future existence. These primordial deities established the basic framework of reality: earth, underworld, attraction, darkness, and night. However, the cosmos remained incomplete without a counterpart to Gaia's earthly realm. Recognizing this need, Gaia engaged in the first act of self-generation recorded in Greek cosmogony, bringing forth Uranus, the sky, from her own essence. This act demonstrated Gaia's fundamental creative power and established the pattern of divine beings generating offspring through various means beyond conventional reproduction. Uranus emerged as a vast dome-like entity who could encompass and cover Gaia entirely, his star-studded form stretching across the heavens and establishing the boundary between the earthly realm below and the cosmic spaces above. His relationship with Gaia was both intimate and cosmic in scope. He lay upon her each night, their union representing the fundamental connection between earth and sky that would drive the weather patterns, seasonal cycles, and agricultural rhythms that would later sustain mortal life. The union of Gaia and Uranus produced the first generation of truly divine beings, entities who possessed both immense power and distinct personalities. Their offspring fell into 3 distinct categories, each representing different aspects of cosmic force and divine authority. The first and most numerous of these children were the Titans, 12 mighty beings who would eventually rule the cosmos before the rise of the Olympian gods. The Titans embodied various fundamental forces and concepts essential to the functioning of the universe. Oceanus controlled the great river that encircled the world, his waters providing the source of all earthly rivers and streams. Coeus represented the axis of heaven around which the constellations revolved, while Creus governed the constellations of the south. Hyperion controlled the light of heaven, serving as the father of the sun, moon, and dawn. Iapetus became the ancestor of humanity through his son Prometheus, establishing the connection between divine and mortal realms. Among the female Titans, Theia embodied the divine light that gave gold, silver, and gems their brilliance. Rhea would later become the mother of the Olympian gods, her maternal nature rivaling that of Gaia herself. Themis represented divine law and proper custom, establishing the moral order that would govern both gods and mortals. Mnemosyne personified memory, ensuring that knowledge and experience would not be lost, but preserved for future generations. Phoebe controlled the prophetic powers associated with the moon, while Tethys served as the mother of river gods and ocean nymphs. The youngest of the Titans, Kronos, possessed a particularly ambitious and ruthless nature that would prove crucial to the next phase of cosmic development. Unlike his siblings, who seemed content with their roles in the established order, Kronos harboured resentment against his father and desires for greater power that would ultimately reshape the divine hierarchy. Alongside the Titans, Gaia and Uranus produced the Cyclopes, 3 one-eyed giants whose names reflected their essential natures and future roles. Brontes commanded thunder, his voice capable of shaking the foundations of mountains. Steropes controlled lightning, wielding the brilliant flashes that could illuminate the entire sky or strike down enemies of the gods. Argus mastered the bright, piercing light that could blind mortals who dared look upon divine glory. These beings possessed incredible skill in metalworking and craftsmanship, their single eyes allowing them to focus with supernatural intensity on their creations. The third category of offspring were the Hecatonchires, 3 beings whose very names described their overwhelming physical characteristics. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges each possessed 50 heads and 100 arms, their multiple limbs capable of hurling rocks with the force of catapults, and their many heads allowing them to maintain constant vigilance in all directions. These beings represented raw, overwhelming force, the kind of power that could tip the balance in any cosmic conflict through sheer physical might rather than cunning or divine authority. However, Uranus viewed his younger children with growing alarm and disgust. The Cyclops and Hecatonchires in particular struck him as monstrous aberrations, whose very existence threatened the ordered beauty of his cosmic realm. Their immense power and strange appearances suggested forces that might eventually challenge his authority or disrupt the harmonious relationship he maintained with Gaia. Rather than allow these beings to develop their full potential, Uranus made the fateful decision to imprison them immediately after their birth. The prison Uranus chose for his troublesome children was Gaia herself, forcing them back into her womb where they remained trapped in darkness and unable to exercise their considerable abilities. This act caused Gaia tremendous physical pain, as her body was stretched and distorted by the presence of these powerful beings who had already grown beyond the size appropriate for such confinement. The constant pressure of their movements within her caused earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, while their frustrated roars emerged as the rumbling sounds that preceded seismic events. More than the physical discomfort, Gaia experienced profound emotional anguish at this treatment of her children. Her maternal instincts demanded that she protect and nurture all her offspring, yet Uranus's authority as her partner and the father of these beings created a complex situation that could not be resolved through direct confrontation. The injustice of imprisoning beings simply for their appearance and potential power offended Gaia's sense of natural order, while the ongoing pain of their confinement made normal existence increasingly unbearable. Gaia's resentment toward Uranus grew with each passing day, fed by both her physical suffering and her moral outrage at his treatment of their children. She began to formulate a plan that would free her imprisoned offspring and punish Uranus for his cruelty, but such a scheme required careful planning and the cooperation of her other children. The Titans, being more conventional in appearance and less obviously threatening, remained free and could potentially serve as instruments of her revenge. The opportunity Gaia sought came through Kronos, whose own ambitions aligned perfectly with her desire for vengeance against Uranus. She approached the youngest Titan with a proposal that would satisfy both their objectives. Kronos would attack and castrate his father during one of Uranus's nightly visits to Gaia, using a specially crafted adamantine sickle that she would provide. This weapon, forged from the hardest substance in existence, would be capable of cutting through even divine flesh and ensuring that Uranus could never again father children or maintain his tyrannical control over his offspring. The plan required precise timing and considerable courage, as Uranus possessed immense power and would not hesitate to destroy any child who dared attack him. Kronos would need to hide until the moment when Uranus was most vulnerable, then strike quickly and decisively before his father could mount a defense. The success of this scheme would not only free the imprisoned Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, but would also establish Kronos as the new ruler of the cosmos, fulfilling his personal ambitions while serving his mother's justice. When the appointed night arrived, Kronos concealed himself in a location where he could observe Uranus's approach, while remaining hidden from his father's view. As Uranus descended from the heavens to embrace Gaia, spreading himself across her form in the familiar pattern of their nightly union, Kronos emerged from his hiding place with the adamantine sickle gleaming in his grasp. The weapon's edge caught what little light existed in the primordial darkness, its supernatural sharpness evident even to divine perception. With a swift, decisive motion, Kronos struck at his father's genitals, the adamantine blade slicing through divine flesh as easily as a mortal knife might cut through water. Uranus's agonized cry shook the foundations of the cosmos, his pain and shock reverberating through every level of existence. The sky's immediate withdrawal from Gaia created the first permanent separation between Earth and Heaven, establishing the distinct realms that would characterize the cosmos from that moment forward. The severed genitals of Uranus fell toward the Earth, but their divine nature prevented them from simply striking the ground and disappearing. Instead, they landed in the sea near the island of Cyprus, their divine essence immediately beginning to interact with the salt water in ways that defied natural law. The immortal flesh dissolved into the waves, but rather than dispersing harmlessly, it created a supernatural foam that began to take on a life and consciousness of its own. From this foam emerged Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, her birth representing one of the most significant events in the early cosmic order. Unlike the other deities who had emerged from chaos or been born through conventional divine reproduction, Aphrodite arose from an act of violence transformed into creation, her very existence embodying the complex relationship between destruction and generation that would characterize much of Greek mythology. Her emergence from the sea foam, fully formed and possessed of incomparable beauty, demonstrated the unpredictable nature of divine birth and the way that even acts of rebellion could produce beneficial results. Aphrodite's birth established several important precedents for the cosmic order. Her origin from Uranus's severed genitals connected her directly to the fundamental creative force that had driven the first generation of divine reproduction, ensuring that love and attraction would remain powerful forces in the universe despite the violent disruption of the original cosmic marriage. Her emergence from the sea linked her to Oceanus and the aquatic realms, while her association with Cyprus gave her a specific geographic connection that would influence mortal worship for millennia to come. The castration of Uranus marked the end of the first phase of cosmic development and established the pattern of violent succession that would characterize divine rule for generations to come. Kronos' successful rebellion demonstrated that even the most fundamental cosmic relationships could be disrupted through decisive action, while the birth of Aphrodite from the violence showed that destruction often contained the seeds of new creation. The liberation of the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires from their imprisonment within Gaia restored the full spectrum of divine power to the cosmos, setting the stage for the conflicts and alliances that would shape the next phase of mythological history. With Uranus permanently separated from Gaia and his tyrannical rule ended, Kronos ascended to supreme power over the cosmos, establishing the first true divine dynasty. The youngest Titan's successful rebellion had demonstrated that cosmic authority could be seized through decisive action, and he wasted no time in consolidating his position as the new ruler of both divine and mortal realms. Unlike his father's distant and often cruel governance, Kronos initially proved to be a more benevolent sovereign, ushering in what would later be remembered as the Golden Age of humanity. Kronos took his sister Rhea as his queen and consort, their union representing the continuation of the pattern established by their parents Gaia and Uranus. Rhea possessed many of the same maternal qualities that had characterized Gaia, her nurturing nature complementing Kronos' more decisive and ambitious personality. Together, they ruled from Mount Olympus, a towering peak that served as the Titan's stronghold and the center of divine administration. The mountain's summit provided a commanding view of the entire world below, allowing the royal couple to observe and govern their vast domains with unprecedented efficiency. Under Kronos' rule, the world experienced an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity. The new king of the gods proved far more attentive to the needs of mortals than Uranus had ever been, establishing natural cycles and seasonal patterns that supported abundant harvests and favourable weather conditions. The earth produced food spontaneously, requiring no cultivation or labour from human hands. Rivers flowed with wine and honey, while trees bore fruit year-round regardless of season. Wild animals lived in harmony with humans, their predatory instincts temporarily suspended by divine decree. During this golden age, mortals experienced lifespans that stretched for centuries, their bodies remaining youthful and vigorous throughout their extended existence. Disease and infirmity were virtually unknown, while death, when it finally came, arrived as gently as sleep, without pain or suffering. Humans possessed an innate wisdom and moral clarity that eliminated conflict and crime from their societies. They lived in small, harmonious communities where private property was unnecessary, because the earth provided abundantly for all needs. Wars were unknown, as were the complex social hierarchies and governmental structures that would characterize later ages. The absence of agriculture meant that humans had no need for tools, weapons, or complex technology. They spent their days in contemplation, artistic creation, and peaceful interaction with both nature and each other. Their natural lifespan allowed them to accumulate vast stores of knowledge and experience. Yet they remained humble and content rather than ambitious or acquisitive. This harmonious existence reflected Kronos' desire to rule over subjects who posed no threat to his authority, their contentment ensuring political stability throughout his realm. However, this idyllic period began to cast shadows over Kronos' mind as he contemplated the circumstances of his own rise to power. The memory of his violent overthrow of Uranus served as a constant reminder that divine authority could be seized through rebellion, and the new king found himself increasingly preoccupied with the possibility that one of his own children might eventually challenge his rule. His father's fate had demonstrated that even the most powerful cosmic entities were vulnerable to determined offspring, and Kronos possessed no illusions about his own immortality or invincibility. These concerns intensified when Gaia, his mother and the original source of cosmic prophecy, delivered a warning that would fundamentally alter the course of divine history. The Earth goddess, whose prophetic abilities stemmed from her connection to the fundamental forces of creation, revealed that Kronos would indeed be overthrown by one of his children, just as he had overthrown Uranus before him. The prophecy specified that this destined child would possess power exceeding even Kronos' considerable abilities, ultimately establishing a new divine order that would eclipse the Titan's reign entirely. The prophecy contained no information about which specific child would fulfill this destiny, or when the overthrow might occur, leaving Kronos to grapple with the terrible uncertainty of knowing his fate without being able to identify the precise threat. Every future child represented a potential usurper, yet the prophecy's inevitability meant that attempts to prevent it might actually serve to bring about its fulfillment. This paradox created a psychological torment that gradually consumed Kronos' thoughts and influenced his increasingly desperate actions. Rather than accept this fate or attempt to rule with such wisdom and justice that his children would have no cause for rebellion, Kronos chose a more direct and brutal solution. He resolved to prevent the prophecy's fulfillment by eliminating each child immediately upon birth, consuming them before they could develop the power necessary to threaten his position. This decision represented a fundamental corruption of his initially benevolent nature, transforming the wise and just ruler of the Golden Age into a paranoid tyrant willing to commit the most heinous acts to preserve his authority. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, Hestia, Kronos immediately seized the newborn goddess and swallowed her whole. The infant disappeared into his divine gullet, trapped within his immortal body, but unable to die due to her own divine nature. This act horrified Rhea, whose maternal instincts rebelled against such treatment of her offspring. But Kronos' determination to prevent his prophesied overthrow overrode any consideration for his wife's feelings or the natural bonds of parenthood. The pattern repeated with devastating regularity as Rhea bore additional children. Demeter, the future goddess of agriculture and harvest, suffered the same fate as her older sister, swallowed alive moments after her birth. Hera, destined to become queen of the Olympian gods, joined her siblings in the dark confines of Kronos' stomach. Hades, the future ruler of the underworld, and Poseidon, who would command the seas, met identical fates despite their considerable divine power and potential. Each act of infanticide further corrupted Kronos' nature while deepening Rhea's anguish and resentment. The Queen of the Titans watched helplessly as her husband systematically destroyed their family, his paranoid obsession with the prophecy overriding every other consideration. The children remained alive within Kronos' body, their divine nature preventing true death, but they were trapped in darkness and unable to develop their abilities or personalities. Their continued existence within their father created a constant source of internal conflict that began to affect Kronos' mental stability and decision-making abilities. When Rhea became pregnant for the 6th time, she could no longer bear the thought of watching another child disappear into Kronos' maw. The accumulated grief and rage from losing 5 children had transformed her from a compliant queen into a determined mother willing to risk everything to save at least one offspring. She secretly consulted with Gaia, seeking her mother-in-law's assistance in preserving this final child from Kronos' destructive paranoia. Gaia, who had her own reasons for wanting to see Kronos' reign ended, readily agreed to help Rhea save the unborn child. The Earth goddess possessed ancient wisdom about hidden places and secret sanctuaries that could conceal even divine beings from detection, and she had grown increasingly dissatisfied with Kronos' rule as his paranoia had gradually eliminated the benevolent policies of the early Golden Age. Together, the The two goddesses devised a plan that would require precise timing and careful deception to succeed. When Rhea's labour began, she travelled secretly to the island of Crete, specifically to a cave on Mount Ida that Gaia had prepared as a sanctuary. The cavern's entrance was concealed by dense vegetation and powerful divine enchantments that would prevent Kronos from detecting the presence of his newborn son. Within the cave's depths, Rhea gave birth to Zeus, the child destined to fulfill the prophecy and overthrow his father's rule. The newborn god displayed immediate signs of his exceptional nature and future power. His cries resonated with such divine authority that they caused the cave walls to tremble, while his eyes blazed with an inner light that illuminated the darkest recesses of the sanctuary. Even as an infant, Zeus possessed a commanding presence that distinguished him from ordinary divine children, his very existence radiating the potential for cosmic transformation. To conceal Zeus's birth from Kronos, Rhea wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes, creating a deceptive bundle that resembled a newborn infant. She returned to Mount Olympus carrying this false child, her acting skills and genuine emotional distress from the separation making her performance entirely convincing. When she presented the bundle to Kronos, claiming it was their latest offspring, the Titan King accepted it without question, his paranoid focus on eliminating threats preventing him from examining the deception too closely. Kronos immediately swallowed the stone-filled bundle, believing he had successfully prevented another potential challenger from threatening his rule. The rock settled into his stomach alongside his 5 actual children, its weight and presence indistinguishable from divine flesh to his internal senses. This successful deception bought Rhea the time necessary to establish Zeus's secret upbringing, while maintaining the illusion that all her children had been eliminated. Meanwhile, Zeus remained hidden in the Cretan cave, where Gaia had arranged for his care and protection. The infant god was nursed by the goat Amalthea, whose milk possessed supernatural properties that accelerated his growth and development far beyond normal divine maturation rates. The cave's acoustics were specially designed to muffle any sounds that might betray Zeus's presence, while its location remained hidden from all divine detection through Gaia's powerful enchantments. As Zeus grew from infant to child to young adult, his power increased exponentially, fed by his divine heritage and the special circumstances of his upbringing. The isolation of the cave allowed him to develop his abilities without interference or distraction, while the knowledge of his true parentage and destiny provided motivation for the intensive training that would prepare him for his eventual confrontation with Kronos. Gaia personally instructed him in the arts of war, strategy, and divine governance, ensuring that he would possess all the skills necessary to succeed where previous challenges to Kronos had failed. The young god's physical development reflected his growing power and authority. Zeus achieved full adult stature and strength within a remarkably short time, his body displaying the perfect proportions and commanding presence appropriate to a future king of the gods. His voice carried the resonant authority of thunder, while his eyes blazed with the intensity of lightning. Even his movements possessed a natural majesty that marked him as fundamentally different from other divine beings, his very presence suggesting the cosmic authority he was destined to wield. When Zeus reached full maturity, he knew the time had come to challenge his father and liberate his imprisoned siblings. However, the task required more than simple divine power, as Kronos had ruled for centuries and commanded the loyalty of most Titans. Zeus would need allies, strategy, and careful timing to succeed, where a direct assault would likely fail. His first priority was freeing his brothers and sisters from their imprisonment within Kronos' body, as their combined power would be essential for any successful rebellion. Zeus approached his father in disguise, presenting himself as a humble cupbearer offering a special drink to honor the king's continued reign. The beverage contained a powerful emetic provided by Gaia, a substance capable of forcing even divine digestion to reverse its normal processes. Kronos, unsuspecting and pleased by what he perceived as appropriate reverence from a minor deity, consumed the entire cup without hesitation. The effects were immediate and violent. Kronos' body convulsed as the emetic took effect, forcing him to regurgitate everything he'd consumed over the preceding years. First came the stone that Rhea had substituted for Zeus, followed in reverse order by each of the 5 genuine children. Poseidon emerged first, followed by Hades, Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia, all of them fully grown and possessed of their complete divine powers despite their long imprisonment. The newly liberated gods immediately recognized Zeus as their rescuer and natural leader, their gratitude combining with their shared resentment toward Kronos to forge an instant alliance. Each sibling had spent decades trapped in darkness, fully conscious but unable to act, their hatred for their father intensified by the prolonged suffering of their imprisonment. They eagerly joined Zeus's rebellion, bringing their considerable individual powers to bear in the coming conflict. However, Kronos was far from defenseless, and his initial shock at the deception quickly transformed into rage and determination to crush this challenge to his authority. He summoned his fellow Titans to Mount Olympus, calling upon their loyalty and shared interest in maintaining the established divine order. Most responded to his call, recognizing that Zeus's rebellion threatened not just Kronos' individual rule, but the entire Titan dynasty's supremacy over the cosmos. The battle lines were drawn with Zeus and his 5 siblings facing Kronos and the majority of the Titan generation. The conflict that followed would become known as the Titanomachy, a 10-year war that would determine the future structure of divine authority and reshape the fundamental nature of cosmic governance. The struggle would test every aspect of divine power, strategy, and determination, ultimately deciding whether the established order would continue or give way to an entirely new pantheon of ruling deities. Zeus recognized that victory would require more than the considerable power of his immediate family. The Titans possessed centuries of experience, established strongholds, and numerical superiority that could not be overcome through direct confrontation alone. He needed additional allies whose power could tip the balance in favor of the younger gods, and his thoughts turned to the Cyclops and Hecatonchires who remained imprisoned in Tartarus, where Kronos had confined them after his own rise to power. These ancient beings possessed exactly the kind of overwhelming force that could prove decisive in the coming war, but liberating them would require a dangerous expedition into the deepest realms of the underworld, where even gods feared to venture without careful preparation and powerful protection. The liberation of Zeus's siblings from Kronos' stomach marked only the beginning of what would become the most consequential conflict in divine history. The 6 young gods found themselves facing not merely their father's wrath, but the combined might of an entire generation of cosmic rulers who had governed the universe for centuries. The Titans commanded vast resources, ancient strongholds, and the accumulated wisdom of prolonged rule, while Zeus's faction possessed little more than righteous anger and untested potential. Zeus understood immediately that conventional warfare would favor his enemies. The Titans had established their seat of power at Mount Olympus, a massive peak that had been fortified over centuries with defensive works that could withstand direct assault from even the most powerful divine forces. The mountain's slopes bristled with supernatural barriers, its approaches guarded by loyal creatures whose allegiance to the Titan dynasty stretched back to the earliest days of organized cosmic governance. Kronos himself had grown more formidable during his long reign, his initial paranoia having evolved into a calculating ruthlessness that made him a far more dangerous opponent than the impulsive young god who had once castrated Uranus. The strategic situation demanded unconventional solutions, and Zeus's thoughts turned to the imprisoned Cyclopes and Hecatonchires who languished in Tartarus. These beings possessed the kind of overwhelming power that could potentially neutralize the Titans' advantages, but reaching them would require penetrating the most secure prison in existence. Tartarus lay deeper beneath the earth than any divine being had ventured since the primordial age, its entrance guarded by supernatural barriers that had been designed to prevent exactly the kind of rescue mission Zeus contemplated. The expedition to Tartarus required careful planning and considerable courage. Zeus led his siblings through the deepest caverns of the earth, following passages that descended far beyond the normal boundaries of Hades' future realm. The journey took them through regions where the very air seemed thick with primordial darkness, where the walls pulsed with an alien life that predated organized creation. Strange sounds echoed from unseen depths, while the temperature fluctuated wildly between extremes that would have been fatal to mortal beings. The prison's entrance appeared as a massive bronze gate whose surface bore inscriptions in languages that predated even the Titan's rule. The lock securing this portal had been forged by Kronos himself, using techniques learned from the Cyclops before their imprisonment, creating a paradoxical situation where the prisoner's own knowledge had been turned against them. Zeus's divine power proved insufficient to break these supernatural restraints through brute force, requiring instead a combination of cunning and precise application of his developing abilities. The key to opening Tartarus lay in understanding the fundamental principles that govern divine imprisonment. The locks responded not to physical force, but to legitimate authority, recognizing only those who possessed the right to command the beings within. Zeus's status as Kronos' son provided the necessary bloodline connection, while his role as leader of the rebellion against Titan tyranny gave him the moral authority to act as liberator. When he spoke the ancient words of release, channeling both his divine heritage and his commitment to justice, the bronze gate swung open with a sound like thunder rolling across distant mountains. The Cyclops emerged first, their single eyes blazing with gratitude and long-suppressed rage. Brontes, Sterapes, and Arges had spent centuries perfecting their craftsmanship in the darkness of their prison, their enforced idleness allowing them to conceive weapons and artifacts of unprecedented power. They immediately pledged their allegiance to Zeus, recognizing in him the leader who could finally break the cycle of divine tyranny that had characterized cosmic governance since Uranus's original reign. The three Hecatonchires followed, their 100 arms flexing with anticipation of the battles to come. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges possessed a straightforward approach to conflict that complemented the Cyclops' more sophisticated contributions. Where the one-eyed giants could forge supernatural weapons and devise complex strategies, the 100-handed ones offered raw, overwhelming force that could shatter enemy formations and demolish fortifications through sheer physical might. The newly liberated allies brought immediate benefits to Zeus's cause. The Cyclops set to work creating weapons specifically designed for the coming war, their supernatural craftsmanship producing artifacts that would become the signature tools of Olympian power. For Zeus himself, they forged the Thunderbolt, a weapon that channeled the raw force of lightning into a form that could be hurled with devastating accuracy. The Thunderbolt's creation required exotic materials gathered from the furthest reaches of the cosmos, its core containing crystallized lightning that had been aged in the depths of storm clouds for millennia. Poseidon received the Trident, a three-pronged weapon that could command the seas, trigger earthquakes, and split solid rock with a single strike. The Trident's tines were forged from metal that had been tempered in the deepest ocean trenches, where pressure and darkness had transformed ordinary materials into substances capable of channeling divine authority over aquatic realms. The weapon's shaft bore inscriptions that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of moving water, allowing its wielder to control everything from gentle rainfall to devastating tsunamis. For Hades, the Cyclops created the Helm of Invisibility, a crown-like artifact that could render its wearer completely undetectable to any form of perception. The helm's construction incorporated shadows that had never been touched by light, woven together with techniques that predated the separation of earth and sky. When worn, it allowed Hades to move unseen through any environment, gathering intelligence and striking at enemies who could neither anticipate nor defend against his attacks. With these powerful allies and supernatural weapons, Zeus's forces began their assault on Mount Olympus. The war that followed would rage for 10 full years, its battles reshaping the physical geography of the world while determining the future structure of divine authority. The conflict's intensity exceeded anything previously witnessed in cosmic history, as two generations of gods unleashed their full power against each other without restraint or mercy. The Titans initially held significant advantages despite their enemies' new allies. Their fortifications on Mount Olympus had been designed to withstand siege warfare, with multiple defensive layers that could channel attacking forces into killing zones where concentrated firepower could eliminate even divine opponents. Kronos had spent centuries preparing for exactly this kind of challenge, his paranoia about potential rebellion having motivated extensive military preparations that now proved their worth. The early battles demonstrated the devastating nature of divine warfare when conducted without limitations. Zeus's thunderbolts could shatter mountainsides and ignite forests across entire continents, while Poseidon's trident triggered earthquakes that reshaped coastlines and created new inland seas. The Titans responded with their own supernatural abilities. Hyperion's control over celestial light creating blinding flashes that could disorient enemies for days, while Oceanus redirected rivers and streams to flood his opponent's positions. The Hecatonchires proved particularly effective in these massive engagements, their 100 arms allowing them to hurl boulders with the rapidity of catapult batteries, while their 50 heads provided comprehensive battlefield awareness that prevented successful flanking maneuvers. Each of the three brothers could single-handedly hold defensive positions that would have required entire armies of lesser beings, their supernatural endurance allowing them to maintain combat effectiveness throughout battles that lasted for months without pause. As the war progressed, its effects began to threaten the stability of the entire cosmos. The constant earthquakes triggered by divine combat caused massive geological upheavals that altered the shapes of continents and created new mountain ranges. The repeated use of thunderbolts and other weather-controlling weapons disrupted normal atmospheric patterns, causing devastating storms in some regions, while creating unnatural droughts in others. The very foundations of reality seemed to tremble under the sustained assault of divine powers operating at their maximum intensity. The turning point came when Zeus realized that victory required more than military superiority. The Titans' resistance drew strength from their conviction that they represented legitimate authority and cosmic order, their centuries of rule having created deep-rooted loyalties among various supernatural beings who served the established regime. To truly defeat them, Zeus needed to demonstrate that his rebellion represented not mere ambition, but genuine justice and superior governance. This recognition led Zeus to focus his strategy on isolating Kronos from his supporters rather than simply overwhelming them through force. He began targeting individual Titans with offers of clemency and positions in the new order, recognizing that many of them had supported Kronos more from habit and family loyalty than from genuine enthusiasm for his increasingly tyrannical methods. The younger generation's obvious moral superiority, combined with their growing military success, gradually eroded the unity that had initially characterized Titan resistance. The final assault on Mount Olympus required coordinating all of Zeus's advantages into a single, overwhelming offensive that would shatter Titan resistance permanently. The Cyclops had spent years developing new weapons specifically for this climactic battle, while the Hecatonchires had been positioned to exploit weaknesses in the mountain's defensive systems that had been identified through careful reconnaissance. Zeus himself had mastered the Thunderbolt's full potential, his growing experience with the weapon allowing him to channel lightning with precision that could strike individual targets amid the chaos of large-scale combat. The battle's opening phase saw Zeus's forces advancing up Mount Olympus's slopes under cover of a supernatural storm that combined natural weather phenomena with divine power. Thunder crashed continuously overhead, while lightning illuminated the battlefield in stark, flickering intervals that revealed the advancing attackers for brief moments before plunging them back into darkness. the Titans responded with their own meteorological weapons, creating conflicting weather patterns that generated tornadoes, hailstorms, and other atmospheric disturbances of unprecedented violence. The Hecatoncheires led the direct assault on the mountain's fortifications, their 100 arms allowing them to tear apart defensive structures that had withstood centuries of lesser attacks. Cottus focused on the main gates, his supernatural strength enabling him to rip bronze barriers from their hinges and hurl them aside like discarded toys. Briareus and Gyges attacked the flanking positions, their coordinated efforts preventing the defenders from concentrating their fire on any single point of the assault. Meanwhile, Hades used his Helm of Invisibility to infiltrate the mountain's interior defences, gathering intelligence about Titan positions while sabotaging key defensive installations from within. His unseen presence allowed him to strike at critical moments when his attacks could maximum disruption to enemy coordination, while his knowledge of the fortress's internal layout proved invaluable for guiding the main assault forces through the most efficient approach routes. Poseidon's contribution came through his control over underground water sources, which he used to undermine the mountain's geological stability, while creating mudslides and sinkholes that disrupted Titan defensive positions. His trident's power over earthquakes proved particularly effective against fortified positions, as even supernatural construction materials could not withstand the fundamental geological forces he commanded. The battle's climax occurred when Zeus finally confronted Kronos, directly in single combat atop Mount Olympus's highest peak. The two gods fought with weapons and powers that had been developed specifically for this moment, their individual duel determining the outcome of the entire war. Kronos wielded a scythe similar to the one he'd used against Uranus, its adamantine blade capable of cutting through any divine defense, while Zeus relied on the thunderbolt's devastating power and his superior speed and agility. The combat between father and son raged across the mountain's summit, their supernatural abilities creating localized weather phenomena that threatened to tear the peak apart through sheer destructive force. Kronos' experience and cunning initially gave him significant advantages, his centuries of rule having taught him combat techniques that Zeus had never encountered. However, the younger god's superior physical condition and moral conviction gradually began to tell, his righteous anger providing motivation that his father's desperate self-preservation could not match. The decisive moment came when Zeus managed to land a direct hit with his thunderbolt, the weapon's divine lightning overwhelming Kronos' defences and leaving him stunned and vulnerable. Rather than deliver a killing blow, Zeus chose to demonstrate the mercy that would characterise his future rule, instead binding his father with supernatural chains that prevented further resistance while preserving his life. This act of clemency impressed even Kronos' remaining supporters, many of whom immediately switched sides rather than continue fighting for a cause that had clearly been defeated. With Kronos' capture, organised Titan resistance collapsed rapidly. Most of the remaining defenders surrendered immediately, recognizing that continued fighting would be both futile and unnecessarily destructive. A few die-hard loyalists attempted to continue the war through guerrilla tactics, but their efforts lacked the coordination and resources necessary to pose any serious threat to Zeus's increasingly dominant position. The war's conclusion required Zeus to make fundamental decisions about the treatment of defeated enemies and the structure of his new government. Rather than executing the Titans or subjecting them to the kind of cruel imprisonment they had inflicted on others, he chose a more nuanced approach that balanced justice with practical governance needs. Most Titans received pardons in exchange for oaths of loyalty to the new regime, their ancient wisdom and administrative experience making them valuable assets for governing the cosmos under Olympian authority. However, the most dangerous and unrepentant Titans faced imprisonment in Tartarus, the same prison from which Zeus had earlier liberated the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires. Kronos himself, along with several of his most devoted supporters, was chained in the deepest levels of this supernatural dungeon, where they would remain under constant guard by the Hecatoncheires. This arrangement served both as punishment for their crimes and as a deterrent to future rebellions, demonstrating that even the most powerful beings could not escape justice indefinitely. The establishment of Tartarus as a prison for divine criminals created an important precedent for Olympian justice. Unlike the arbitrary cruelties that had characterized previous divine regimes, Zeus's punishment system was based on clear principles of proportional response and genuine deterrence. The prison's conditions were harsh, but not gratuitously cruel, designed to prevent escape and discourage further rebellion rather than simply inflicting suffering for its own sake. With the Titanomachy concluded and his authority established, Zeus faced the complex task of organizing a new system of cosmic governance. The universe required active administration to maintain the natural cycles and divine interventions that supported mortal life, while the various supernatural beings who had served the Titans needed new roles and responsibilities under the Olympian regime. The young god's decisions during this transition period would determine whether his victory led to genuine improvement in cosmic governance or merely replaced one form of tyranny with another. The first major decision involved dividing authority among Zeus's siblings, each of whom had contributed significantly to the victory and deserved recognition for their efforts. Rather than attempting to micromanage every aspect of cosmic governance personally, Zeus chose to delegate major responsibilities to family members whose abilities and interests aligned with specific domains of divine authority. The division of the cosmos among the three brothers followed logical lines based on their individual strengths and preferences. Zeus retained control over the sky and upper atmosphere, domains that suited his mastery of weather phenomena and his role as supreme ruler of the gods. His thunderbolt made him the natural choice for governing celestial events, while his position as leader of the rebellion gave him the moral authority necessary for making final decisions about cosmic policy. Poseidon received dominion over the seas and all bodies of water, an assignment that matched perfectly with his trident's powers and his demonstrated ability to control aquatic phenomena. The ocean's vast extent and crucial importance to mortal life made this one of the most significant divine portfolios, requiring constant attention to maintain the delicate balance between beneficial and destructive aquatic forces. Poseidon's temperament, which combined creative power with occasional violent outbursts, suited him well for governing waters that could be both life-giving and devastatingly dangerous. Hades accepted responsibility for the underworld and the realm of the dead, a domain that many might have considered undesirable but which appealed to his preference for solitude and his natural inclination toward justice. His helm of invisibility made him ideally suited for moving unseen through the shadowy realms beneath the earth, while his serious personality provided the appropriate gravitas for judging deceased souls and maintaining order among the dead. This tripartite division left the earth itself as neutral territory, where all three brothers could exercise appropriate authority within their respective spheres of influence. Mortals would interact with all three gods depending on their activities and needs, while the Earth's surface would serve as the primary stage for divine intervention in human affairs. This arrangement prevented any single deity from accumulating excessive power, while ensuring that every aspect of cosmic governance received appropriate attention from qualified divine administrators. The establishment of Mount Olympus as the new seat of divine government marked a symbolic break with the previous regime, while providing practical advantages for cosmic administration. Unlike Mount Olympus, which had been chosen primarily for its defensive capabilities, Olympus was selected for its commanding view of both mortal and divine realms, its pleasant climate, and its accessibility to the various supernatural beings who would need regular contact with the ruling pantheon. The mountain's summit was transformed through divine power into a magnificent complex of palaces, meeting halls, and administrative buildings that reflected both the Olympians' superior aesthetic sense and their commitment to more open and accessible governance. Where the Titans had ruled from forbidding fortresses designed to intimidate and exclude, the Olympians created a seat of government that welcomed visitors and encouraged the kind of regular interaction between rulers and subjects that had been impossible under the previous regime. However, Zeus's victory had created new challenges that would require careful management to prevent future conflicts. The defeat of the Titans had eliminated one generation of potential rivals, but it had also demonstrated that divine authority could be successfully challenged through organized rebellion backed by sufficient power. Other supernatural beings who had grievances against the new regime might be tempted to follow Zeus's example, creating a cycle of violent succession that could destabilize cosmic governance indefinitely. The establishment of Zeus's authority over the cosmos marked the beginning of a new era in divine governance. But the young king of the gods quickly discovered that victory and war provided only the foundation for the far more complex challenges of peaceful administration. The universe required constant oversight to maintain the delicate balances that supported both mortal and immortal life, while the various supernatural beings who populated the divine hierarchy needed clear roles and responsibilities to prevent the kind of chaos that had characterized earlier transitions of power. Zeus's decisions during this crucial period would determine whether the Olympian regime represented genuine progress in cosmic governance or merely another iteration of the cyclical violence that had plagued divine rule since the primordial age. Zeus's position as king of the gods encompassed multiple overlapping roles that reflected both his personal abilities and the practical requirements of cosmic administration. His primary identity as sky god gave him direct control over weather phenomena, atmospheric conditions, and celestial events that affected every aspect of mortal existence. The thunderbolt remained his signature weapon and symbol of authority, its crackling energy serving as both a tool of justice and a reminder of the devastating power that backed his commands. Unlike previous rulers who had governed through distant decree, Zeus maintained active involvement in the daily operations of his domain, personally directing storm systems, managing seasonal transitions, and ensuring that agricultural cycles proceeded according to the needs of mortal populations. His role as supreme lawgiver proved equally important to the stability of the new order. Zeus established comprehensive legal codes that governed interactions between gods, between mortals, and between the two groups, creating predictable frameworks for resolving disputes and punishing violations of cosmic order. These laws differed significantly from the arbitrary edicts that had characterized Titan rule, incorporating principles of proportional justice, consistent application, and appeals processes that prevented the kind of capricious cruelty that had marked earlier divine regimes. The king's personal involvement in major legal decisions ensured that justice remained connected to wisdom rather than mere power, though his judgments carried the full weight of divine authority when enforcement became necessary. Zeus's numerous romantic relationships reflected both his personal inclinations and the political necessities of consolidating divine authority across the various supernatural communities that populated the cosmos. His marriage to Hera, his sister and the goddess of marriage itself, represented the formal establishment of the Olympian royal house and provided the stability necessary for long-term dynastic planning. Hera's own divine portfolio made her an ideal queen. Her expertise in marital relationships and family structures, complementing Zeus's broader governmental responsibilities, while ensuring that the royal couple could present a united front on issues affecting divine and mortal families. However, Zeus's extramarital relationships served important political and genetic purposes that extended far beyond personal gratification. His liaisons with various goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women produced offspring who inherited combinations of divine abilities that proved crucial for governing specific aspects of the cosmos. These children often received domains and responsibilities that reflected their mixed heritage, creating a diverse pantheon of specialized deities who could address particular needs that the major Olympians lacked the time or inclination to handle personally. The relationship with Metis, the titaness of wisdom and cunning, produced Athena, whose birth from Zeus's head symbolized the integration of intelligence with divine authority. This unusual birth method, which occurred after Zeus had swallowed the pregnant Metis to prevent a prophesied threat to his rule, demonstrated his willingness to take extreme measures to protect his position, while simultaneously showing how even desperate acts could produce beneficial results. Athena emerged fully grown and armed, her immediate readiness for both intellectual and military challenges making her an invaluable asset for the Olympian administration. His affair with Leto, despite Hera's jealous persecution of the Titaness, resulted in the birth of Apollo and Artemis, twins whose complementary abilities filled crucial gaps in the divine hierarchy. Apollo's mastery of music, prophecy, and solar phenomena provided the Olympians with both cultural leadership and essential knowledge about future events, while Artemis's dominion over hunting and lunar cycles ensured proper management of wildlife populations and nocturnal activities that affected both gods and mortals. The liaison with the mortal princess Semele, though it ended tragically with her death, produced Dionysus, whose unique status as a god born from a mortal woman created important precedents for divine-human interaction. Dionysus's eventual elevation to full Olympian status demonstrated that the new pantheon remained open to expansion and evolution, unlike the rigid hierarchies that had characterized previous divine regimes. Among the major Olympians, each deity developed distinct spheres of influence that reflected their individual abilities while contributing to the overall functioning of cosmic governance. Hera's role as goddess of marriage extended beyond simple oversight of wedding ceremonies to encompass the complex social structures that marriage created and maintained. She supervised the legal frameworks that governed inheritance, legitimacy, and family obligations, ensuring that both divine and mortal societies maintained the stability that came from clearly defined kinship relationships. Her famous jealousy regarding Zeus's affairs reflected not merely personal wounded pride, but genuine concern for the institutional integrity of marriage as a social foundation. Hera's administrative responsibilities included managing the complex network of divine marriages that created alliances between different supernatural communities. Her approval was required for unions between major deities, while her blessing could ensure fertility and happiness for mortal couples who honoured her properly. The goddess maintained detailed records of genealogical relationships that proved essential for resolving inheritance disputes and preventing inappropriate marriages between closely related individuals. Her palace on Mount Olympus served as both a residence and an administrative centre, where marriage contracts were negotiated and family disputes were adjudicated. Athena's portfolio encompassed wisdom in all its practical applications, making her one of the most versatile and valuable members of the Olympian pantheon. Her expertise extended from military strategy and defensive warfare to craftsmanship, urban planning, and the development of technologies that improved mortal life. Unlike Ares, who revelled in the chaos and violence of battle, Athena approached warfare as a problem-solving exercise that required careful analysis, strategic thinking, and precise execution. Her preferred tactics emphasized defensive positioning, superior equipment, and coordinated teamwork over individual heroics or berserker fury. The goddess's role in promoting human civilization went far beyond military applications. She personally instructed mortals in weaving, pottery, metalworking, and other crafts that transformed raw materials into useful objects, her teaching methods emphasizing both technical skill and artistic excellence. Athena's influence could be seen in the development of urban centers, where her guidance helped mortals create efficient layouts, effective fortifications, and public buildings that served community needs while reflecting aesthetic principles that honoured the gods. Her relationship with Zeus remained particularly close, reflecting both her unusual birth and their shared commitment to justice and order. Athena served as her father's primary advisor on matters requiring careful analysis and long-term planning, her counsel proving invaluable for decisions that would affect the stability of divine governance. The goddess's virgin status allowed her to maintain complete independence from the romantic entanglements that complicated other deities' political positions, ensuring that her advice remained untainted by personal interests or family obligations. Apollo's multifaceted divine nature made him one of the most complex and influential Olympians, his various roles often requiring careful balancing to prevent conflicts between his different responsibilities. As god of the sun, he controlled the daily cycle of light and darkness that regulated both natural processes and human activities, his chariot's journey across the sky providing the consistent illumination that made agriculture, navigation, and countless other mortal endeavours possible. The precision required for this daily task demanded both supernatural stamina and unwavering attention to detail, as even minor variations in timing or intensity could disrupt seasonal patterns and agricultural cycles. His mastery of music and poetry established Apollo as the leader of the Muses and the primary patron of artistic endeavours that elevated human culture beyond mere survival. The god's lyre produced melodies that could soothe savage beasts, inspire heroic deeds, or induce prophetic trances in mortals who heard its divine harmonies. Apollo personally taught music to selected mortals, his instruction creating lineages of skilled performers whose abilities reflected their divine training. The god's standards for artistic excellence remained impossibly high, and those who challenged his supremacy in musical contests faced severe punishment for their presumption. Apollo's prophetic abilities provided the Olympians with crucial intelligence about future events, though his oracles spoke in riddles and ambiguous phrases that required careful interpretation. The most famous of these oracular sites, the temple at Delphi, became a major centre of divine-mortal interaction, where pilgrims from across the known world sought guidance about everything from personal decisions to matters of state policy. The Pythia, Apollo's priestess at Delphi, delivered prophecies while in a trance state induced by vapours rising from the chasm in the earth, her cryptic utterances providing genuine insight into future possibilities while maintaining the mystery that surrounded divine knowledge. Artemis complemented her twin brothers' solar associations through her dominion over lunar phenomena and nocturnal activities. As goddess of the hunt, she supervised the complex relationships between predators and prey that maintained ecological balance, ensuring that animal populations remained stable while providing mortals with the game they needed for survival. Her expertise in archery made her the patron of hunters who relied on skill and precision rather than brute force, her blessing essential for those who sought to take animal life without wasteful excess or unnecessary cruelty. The goddess's role as protector of young animals and virgin goddesses reflected her commitment to preserving innocence and potential until the appropriate time for their full expression. Artemis maintained a band of nymph companions who had sworn oaths of chastity, their dedication to her service providing them with supernatural abilities and protection from unwanted advances. The goddess's own virgin status symbolized her complete independence from romantic entanglements that might compromise her judgment or divide her loyalties between personal desires and divine responsibilities. Her monthly journey across the night sky in her silver chariot provided illumination for nocturnal activities, while creating the tidal cycles that affected coastal regions and the reproductive cycles of numerous species. Artemis's arrows could bring either swift, painless death or healing, depending on her judgment of the target's worthiness and the circumstances surrounding their encounter with her divine presence. Aphrodite's emergence from the sea foam, created by Uranus's castration, gave her a unique position within the Olympian pantheon, her origins predating Zeus's rise to power, while her influence remained essential for the continuation of both divine and mortal life. As goddess of love and beauty, she controlled the fundamental forces of attraction that drove reproduction, artistic inspiration, and the emotional bonds that held communities together. Her power extended beyond simple physical desire to encompass the complex psychological and social dynamics that created lasting relationships between individuals and groups. The goddess's ability to inspire love could unite enemies, motivate heroic deeds, or destroy established relationships depending on her intentions and the worthiness of those involved. Aphrodite's interventions in mortal affairs often produced dramatic consequences that rippled through generations, her gifts of beauty or romantic success carrying responsibilities that recipients frequently fail to understand until too late. The goddess demanded proper recognition and respect for love's power, punishing those who scorned romantic relationships or claimed superiority to the forces she represented. Her marriage to Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, represented a political alliance that combined beauty with practical skill, though their relationship remained complicated by Aphrodite's affair with Ares and her various romantic involvements with both gods and mortals. The goddess's children inherited aspects of her power over attraction and desire, creating a network of minor deities who specialized in different aspects of love and beauty. Ares embodied the brutal, chaotic aspects of warfare that complemented Athena's more strategic approach to military conflict. Where Athena emphasized planning, discipline, and defensive tactics, Ares reveled in the blood-soaked fury of close combat, his presence on battlefields inspiring both sides to greater levels of violence and heroic recklessness. The god's influence could turn minor skirmishes into devastating conflicts, his bloodlust feeding on the chaos and destruction that warfare inevitably produced. Despite his fearsome reputation, Ares served important functions within the cosmic order. His willingness to embrace violence provided a necessary outlet for aggressive impulses that might otherwise destabilize peaceful societies, while his protection of warriors who fought with courage and honor ensured that military virtues remained valued even during peaceful periods. The god's relationship with Aphrodite reflected the complex connections between love and war, passion and violence that characterized many aspects of both divine and mortal experience. The relationships between these major Olympians created a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and mutual dependencies that shaped divine politics and influenced their interactions with mortal worshippers. Zeus's position as king required him to mediate disputes between his fellow gods while maintaining his own authority, a balancing act that demanded both diplomatic skill and the occasional demonstration of overwhelming power. The king's decisions about divine jurisdictions, marriage arrangements, and punishment of transgressions established precedents that would influence cosmic governance for millennia to come. The establishment of divine order under Zeus's rule created a stable foundation for cosmic governance, but the universe remained incomplete without mortal beings who could populate the earth and provide proper worship to the gods. The question of humanity's creation would prove complex, involving multiple divine interventions and reflecting the competing interests of various Olympian deities who sought to shape mortal nature according to their own priorities and philosophical perspectives. The primary architect of human creation was Prometheus, a titan whose name meant forethought and whose intellectual abilities had distinguished him even among his remarkably gifted generation. Unlike many of his fellow titans who had supported Kronos during the Great War, Prometheus had recognized Zeus's superior moral authority and had provided crucial assistance to the Olympian cause. His strategic counsel and detailed knowledge of Titan weaknesses had contributed significantly to Zeus's victory, earning him a place of honor in the new divine order despite his Titan heritage. Prometheus possessed an unusual combination of artistic vision and practical engineering skill that made him ideally suited for the delicate task of creating mortal beings. His understanding of divine nature, gained through centuries of interaction with various supernatural entities, provided him with insights into the qualities that would make humans both useful to the gods and capable of independent existence. The Titan approached human creation as both a technical challenge and an artistic opportunity, seeking to produce beings who would reflect the best aspects of divine nature while remaining fundamentally distinct from their immortal creators. The raw material for human construction came from clay gathered from specific locations across the earth, where Gaia's creative power remained strongest. Prometheus selected these sites carefully, choosing clay deposits that had been enriched by centuries of contact with divine essence and natural forces. The clay's composition varied depending on its origin, with different regions contributing unique properties that would later manifest as the diverse characteristics found among human populations. River valley clay provided fertility and agricultural aptitude, while mountain clay contributed physical strength and endurance, and coastal clay enhanced adaptability and navigation skills. The actual shaping process required supernatural precision and artistic sensitivity that few beings possessed. Prometheus worked with tools forged by the Cyclops specifically for this purpose, implements that could manipulate clay at the molecular level while maintaining the organic cohesion necessary for living tissue. Each human form required individual attention, as mass production would have eliminated the subtle variations that made mortals interesting and prevented them from becoming mere copies of a single template. The Titan began with basic anatomical structures, creating skeletal frameworks that could support upright posture while maintaining the flexibility necessary for complex movements. The proportions reflected divine aesthetics while accommodating the practical requirements of mortal existence, with limbs designed for both delicate manipulation and heavy labour, torsos capable of housing the organs necessary for independent life, and heads sized appropriately for brains that could process complex thoughts without requiring divine-level energy consumption. Muscular and circulatory systems followed, with Prometheus paying particular attention to the balance between strength and endurance that would allow humans to survive in various environments without supernatural assistance. The cardiovascular network he designed could adapt to different altitudes and climates, while the muscular structure provided sufficient power for agriculture, construction, and defense, without the overwhelming capabilities that might tempt mortals to challenge divine authority. The nervous system represented Prometheus's most sophisticated achievement, creating pathways that could process sensory information, coordinate physical responses, and support the kind of abstract thinking that would distinguish humans from other mortal creatures. The brain's design incorporated memory storage capabilities that could accumulate knowledge across decades of experience, emotional processing centers that would make humans capable of art and love, and reasoning abilities that would allow them to solve problems and adapt to changing circumstances. However, these carefully crafted forms remained lifeless clay until Athena provided the divine spark that would animate them into living beings. The goddess of wisdom recognized the significance of this moment and approached her contribution with appropriate solemnity, understanding that her gift would determine whether Prometheus's creations became mere animated sculptures or genuine living creatures capable of growth and self-determination. Athena's breath carried more than simple animation. It contained aspects of divine intelligence that would allow humans to learn, create, and develop their own cultures and technologies. The goddess infused each clay form with a portion of her own wisdom, though carefully limited to prevent mortals from achieving divine-level knowledge that might make them arrogant or dangerous. This divine essence provided humans with curiosity about their environment, the ability to recognize patterns and relationships, and the capacity for moral reasoning that would allow them to distinguish between right and wrong behavior. The moment of animation proved dramatic and transformative. As Athena's breath entered the clay forms, their surfaces flushed with the warm tones of living flesh, their eyes opened to reveal the spark of consciousness, and their chests began the rhythmic rise and fall of independent breathing. The first humans stirred to life with expressions of wonder and confusion, their newly awakened minds struggling to process the flood of sensory information that accompanied consciousness. These initial humans represented the pinnacle of mortal creation, beings who possessed all the positive qualities that Prometheus and Athena had sought to instill without any of the negative traits that would later characterize their descendants. They awakened into a world that Zeus had prepared specifically for their benefit, a realm where the earth provided abundantly for all their needs without requiring labour or struggle. This first generation of humanity inaugurated what would later be remembered as the Golden Age, a period when mortals lived in harmony with both nature and the gods. The humans of this era possessed lifespans that stretched across centuries, their bodies remaining youthful and vigorous throughout their extended existence. Disease and physical infirmity were unknown, while death, when it finally arrived, came as gently as sleep, without pain or fear. The Golden Age humans lived in small communities scattered across the Earth's most fertile regions, their settlements characterized by cooperation and mutual support rather than competition or conflict. Private property remained unnecessary because the Earth produced food, clothing and shelter materials spontaneously, eliminating the scarcity that might have created disputes over resources. Their dwellings were simple but comfortable structures that blended harmoniously with the natural environment, requiring no complex construction techniques or elaborate furnishing. Agriculture was unknown during this period because it was unnecessary. Trees bore fruit continuously regardless of season, while grains grew wild in fields that never required planting or cultivation. Rivers flowed with pure water that never became contaminated, while honey dripped from rocks and wine flowed from natural springs. The climate remained perpetually mild, eliminating the need for heavy clothing or elaborate shelter, while dangerous weather phenomena like storms or droughts never occurred. The Golden Age humans possessed an innate moral clarity that eliminated crime and conflict from their societies. They understood intuitively the difference between beneficial and harmful actions, their decisions guided by wisdom rather than selfish desire or emotional impulse. Violence was not merely forbidden, but literally unthinkable, as their nature prevented them from conceiving of actions that might harm other beings. This moral perfection extended to their relationships with animals, who lived without fear of human predation and often served as companions rather than sources of food or labour. Their intellectual capabilities allowed them to develop sophisticated philosophical and artistic traditions, despite their lack of complex technology. Golden Age humans created poetry, music, and visual arts that reflected their harmonious relationship with the divine realm, their work serving as expressions of gratitude and wonder, rather than attempts to escape or transform their circumstances. Their oral traditions preserved knowledge and wisdom that would influence later generations, though much of this learning would be lost during subsequent ages of decline. The relationship between Golden Age humans and the gods remained close and respectful, characterized by regular communication and mutual benefit. The gods frequently visited mortal communities, offering guidance and enjoying the hospitality of beings who honored them without fear or civility. These interactions allowed mortals to learn directly from divine wisdom, while providing the gods with the worship and appreciation that validated their cosmic roles. However, this perfect age could not last indefinitely. The Golden Age humans, despite their moral excellence and extended lifespans, remained mortal beings whose deaths eventually removed them from the world. Unlike later generations who would face judgment and potential punishment after death, these first humans were transformed into benevolent spirits who continued to watch over and protect their descendants. Their transformation reflected their moral perfection and the gods' recognition of their special status as the first and finest examples of mortal creation. The Silver Age that followed represented the first step in humanity's gradual decline from the perfection of their original creation. Zeus created this second generation of mortals through different methods that reflected his growing experience with human nature and his evolving understanding of what qualities would make mortals both useful and manageable. The Silver Age humans possessed many of the same basic capabilities as their predecessors, but lacked the moral clarity and wisdom that had characterized the Golden Age. These new humans required a full century to mature from childhood to adulthood, their extended development period reflecting both their reduced capabilities and Zeus's attempt to provide them with sufficient time to acquire the wisdom their nature no longer supplied automatically. During their prolonged childhood, Silver Age humans remained under the protection and guidance of their mothers, learning the skills and knowledge necessary for independent existence, through instruction rather than intuitive understanding. The Silver Age brought the first appearance of seasons and weather variations that required humans to adapt their behaviour to changing environmental conditions. Agriculture became necessary as the earth no longer provided food spontaneously, forcing mortals to learn techniques of planting, cultivation and harvest that would sustain them through periods of natural scarcity. The development of farming skills marked the beginning of human technology and the gradual accumulation of practical knowledge that would characterize later civilizations. However, the Silver Age humans possessed a fatal flaw that would ultimately lead to their destruction. They developed an arrogant disregard for the gods that manifested in their refusal to offer proper sacrifices or maintain the temples and shrines that honored divine authority. This impiety reflected not merely ignorance, but active contempt for the cosmic order that had created and sustained them, their pride convincing them that they could achieve prosperity and happiness without divine assistance or approval. Their religious negligence extended beyond simple failure to perform required rituals to active defiance of divine commands and mockery of sacred traditions. Silver Age humans began to claim that their achievements in agriculture and craftsmanship demonstrated their superiority to the gods, arguing that beings who required worship and sacrifice were obviously inferior to mortals who could create their own prosperity through skill and effort. This hubris violated the fundamental principles of cosmic order and demanded divine response. Zeus initially attempted to correct their behavior through warnings and minor punishments that demonstrated divine power without causing permanent harm. Crop failures, unseasonable weather, and other natural disasters served as reminders of divine authority and human dependence on cosmic order. However, the Silver Age humans interpreted these events as natural phenomena that could be overcome through improved technology and better planning, their rational approach to problem-solving preventing them from recognizing the divine messages embedded in their difficulties. The king of the gods finally concluded that the Silver Age humans were irredeemably corrupted by their pride and could not be reformed through gentle correction. Their destruction became necessary to prevent their impiety from spreading to other mortal populations and to demonstrate that divine authority remained supreme regardless of human achievements or technological capabilities. Zeus's decision to eliminate the Silver Age reflected his commitment to maintaining cosmic order, even when such maintenance required harsh measures. The Bronze Age humans who replaced the Silver Age represented Zeus's attempt to create mortals whose nature would prevent the kind of religious arrogance that had doomed their predecessors. These new humans possessed tremendous physical strength and aggressive temperaments that channeled their energies toward warfare and conquest, rather than philosophical speculation about divine authority. Their bodies were larger and more muscular than previous generations, while their minds focused on practical concerns of survival and dominance, rather than abstract questions about cosmic order. Bronze Age technology reflected their violent nature and physical capabilities. They developed sophisticated weapons and armor crafted from bronze that gave their era its name, their metalworking skills producing implements of war that far exceeded anything achieved by earlier generations. Spears, swords, shields, and helmets became the defining artifacts of their civilization, while their architectural achievements focused primarily on fortifications and defensive structures designed to protect communities from constant warfare. The Bronze Age humans lived in a state of perpetual conflict that consumed their energies and prevented them from developing the kind of organized impiety that had characterized the Silver Age. Their societies were organized around military hierarchies and warrior codes that emphasized courage, strength, and loyalty to leaders who'd proven themselves in battle. This focus on warfare provided outlet for aggressive impulses while maintaining social structures that honored strength and achievement rather than challenging divine authority. However, their violent nature ultimately proved as destructive as the Silver Age's impiety. Bronze Age humans directed their aggression not only against each other, but but against the natural world, their warfare causing environmental destruction that threatened the stability of entire regions. Their constant fighting prevented the development of stable agricultural systems, while their weapons and tactics grew increasingly sophisticated and deadly as each generation sought advantages over their enemies. The escalating violence of Bronze Age warfare eventually reached levels that threatened the cosmic order itself. Their battles produced casualties on scales that overwhelmed the natural cycles of death and rebirth, while their environmental destruction damaged the Earth's capacity to support life. The gods recognized that allowing this trend to continue would eventually make the world uninhabitable for any form of mortal life, requiring intervention to prevent complete ecological collapse. Zeus's solution involved the creation of the Heroic Age, a brief period that interrupted the pattern of decline and produced mortals whose achievements would be remembered and celebrated for millennia. The heroes of this age possessed combinations of divine and mortal heritage that gave them capabilities exceeding those of ordinary humans while maintaining their essential mortality. These demigods served as bridges between the divine and mortal realms, their adventures and achievements demonstrating the potential for cooperation between gods and humans. The Heroic Age produced legendary figures whose exploits became the foundation for countless stories and religious traditions. Heroes like Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, and Achilles accomplished feats that required both supernatural ability and moral courage, their adventures serving as examples of how mortals could achieve greatness through proper relationships with divine patrons. These heroes often served as agents of divine will, carrying out missions that served cosmic justice while demonstrating the rewards available to mortals who honoured the gods appropriately. However, the Heroic Age remained a temporary interruption in humanity's overall decline, rather than a permanent solution to the problems of mortal nature. The heroes themselves were exceptional individuals whose divine heritage made them fundamentally different from ordinary humans, while their achievements often required divine assistance that was not available to common mortals. Their deaths in battle or through divine punishment demonstrated that even the greatest mortal achievements remain subject to cosmic authority and the limitations of mortal existence. The current Iron Age represents the final stage of human decline, characterized by qualities that would have horrified the Golden Age humans who first received the gift of life. Iron Age humans possess shortened lifespans, physical weakness, and moral corruption that make their lives difficult and their societies unstable. They must struggle constantly against scarcity, disease, and conflict, their existence marked by the kind of suffering that was unknown during earlier ages. The Iron Age brought the development of complex social hierarchies based on wealth and power rather than wisdom or moral excellence. Private property became essential for survival, creating inequalities that generated envy, theft, and violence among people who might otherwise have lived peacefully. Political systems emerged to manage these conflicts, but their leaders often proved corrupt or incompetent, their decisions serving personal interests rather than community welfare. The Iron Age's harsh realities and moral corruption created an environment where exceptional individuals could emerge as beacons of hope and agents of divine will. These heroes possessed combinations of supernatural ability, noble character, and divine favour that enabled them to accomplish feats far beyond ordinary mortal capabilities. Their adventures served multiple purposes within the cosmic order. They eliminated threats that endangered civilized life, established precedents for proper relationships between mortals and gods, and demonstrated that, even in humanity's degraded state, individuals could achieve greatness through courage, wisdom, and devotion to justice. Perseus emerged as one of the earliest and most significant of these legendary figures, his birth circumstances reflecting the complex relationships between divine desire and mortal consequences that would characterize many heroic origins. His mother Danae was the daughter of King Acrisius of Argos, a ruler whose consultation with an oracle had revealed a prophecy that would fundamentally alter his family's destiny. The oracle declared that Acrisius would be killed by his daughter's son, a prediction that filled the king with terror and prompted him to take extreme measures to prevent its fulfillment. Acrisius's solution involved imprisoning Danae in a bronze chamber buried deep beneath his palace, a prison designed to prevent any contact with mortal men who might father the prophesied child. The chamber's construction incorporated the finest metalworking techniques available. Its walls, forged from bronze plates, fitted so precisely that no gaps existed through which even the smallest creature could pass. The only opening was a narrow slot through which food and water could be delivered, while guards maintained constant surveillance to ensure that no unauthorized visitors could approach the prison. However, Acrisius's precautions proved inadequate against divine intervention. Zeus had observed Danae's beauty and virtue during her years of freedom, and her imprisonment only intensified his desire to possess her. The king of the gods possessed numerous methods for bypassing mortal security measures, and he chose an approach that demonstrated both his supernatural abilities and his appreciation for dramatic effect. Zeus transformed himself into a shower of golden rain that penetrated the bronze chamber through microscopic gaps in the metalwork, his divine essence maintaining coherence despite its dispersed form. The golden rain fell upon Danae as she lay sleeping, its touch gentle yet unmistakably divine in nature. The transformation allowed Zeus to unite with the imprisoned princess without causing physical harm or psychological trauma, his divine essence merging with her mortal form in a union that transcended normal biological processes. The experience left Danae with clear knowledge of her child's divine parentage, though she understood the dangers that such knowledge would create if revealed to her father. Perseus's birth occurred under circumstances of extreme secrecy, with Danae managing to conceal her pregnancy and delivery from the guards who monitored her prison. The infant displayed immediate signs of his exceptional nature, his eyes blazing with an inner light that reflected his divine heritage, while his cries resonated with authority that seemed inappropriate for a newborn child. Danae recognized that her son's obvious supernatural qualities would make concealment impossible once Acrisius discovered his existence. When the king finally learned of his grandson's birth, his reaction combined fury at the circumvention of his precautions with terror at the prophecy's apparent approach toward fulfillment. However, Acrisius could not bring himself to murder the child directly, as killing his own grandson would violate sacred laws of kinship and invite divine punishment that might prove worse than the prophesied death. Instead, he chose a solution that would remove the threat while avoiding direct responsibility for the child's death. Acrisius ordered Danae and Perseus sealed inside a wooden chest and cast into the sea, trusting that the waves would accomplish what he dared not do personally. The chest was constructed from sturdy timber and sealed with pitch to make it temporarily seaworthy, though it lacked any provisions for long-term survival. The king's plan assumed that mother and child would perish from exposure, thirst, or drowning, their deaths appearing to result from natural causes rather than deliberate murder. The chest drifted across the Mediterranean for days, its occupants sustained by divine intervention that prevented the natural consequences of their exposure. Poseidon, responding to Zeus's request for assistance, guided the vessel's course toward the island of Seriphos, where it would wash ashore near a fishing village whose inhabitants might provide sanctuary for the castaways. The sea god's influence also maintained favourable weather conditions that prevented storms from destroying the fragile craft during its journey. The chest was discovered by Dictys, a fisherman whose nets had become entangled with the vessel during his morning fishing expedition. The fisherman's initial assumption that he had caught a large piece of driftwood gave way to amazement when he heard voices from within the sealed container, and his efforts to open the chest revealed the remarkable circumstances of its contents. Danae's beauty and obvious noble bearing, combined with the infant's supernatural appearance, convinced Dictys that divine forces had brought these refugees to his shores, Dictys provided the mother and child with shelter in his modest home, his hospitality reflecting both natural kindness and recognition that protecting beings with obvious divine connections would likely bring divine favour in return. The fisherman's household expanded to accommodate the newcomers, while his wife took particular pleasure in helping to care for Perseus, whose precocious development and remarkable intelligence made him an engaging child despite his divine heritage's occasional unsettling manifestations. Perseus grew to maturity under Dictys' protection, his education combining practical skills necessary for survival in a fishing community with training in combat techniques and heroic traditions that would prepare him for his destined adventures. The young hero's divine heritage manifested in supernatural strength, enhanced reflexes, and an intuitive understanding of strategy and tactics that made him formidable despite his youth. His weapons training progressed rapidly, as his natural abilities allowed him to master techniques that required years of practice for ordinary mortals. However, Perseus's peaceful existence on Seriphos faced disruption when Polydectes, the island's king and Dictys' brother, became obsessed with possessing Danae. Despite her obvious reluctance to accept his advances, the king's position gave him significant advantages in pursuing his desires, while his increasingly aggressive courtship created dangerous situations that Perseus felt compelled to address despite the political risks involved in challenging royal authority. Polydectes recognized that Perseus represented the primary obstacle to his plans for Danae, as the young hero's protective instincts and growing reputation made him a dangerous enemy. Rather than risk direct confrontation with a youth whose divine heritage was becoming increasingly obvious, the king devised a scheme that would remove Perseus from the island, while providing him with an honourable excuse for the young man's absence. Polydectes announced his intention to marry a different woman and requested that all the island's young men contribute gifts appropriate for a royal wedding. When Perseus appeared at the gift-giving ceremony without an offering, Polydectes publicly challenged him to demonstrate his heroic credentials by accomplishing a feat worthy of his claimed divine parentage. The king suggested that Perseus retrieve the head of Medusa, one of the 3 Gorgon sisters whose appearance was so hideous that direct sight of her face turned viewers instantly to stone. This quest appeared impossible for any mortal to accomplish, as approaching Medusa close enough to decapitate her would require looking at her directly, resulting in immediate petrification. Perseus accepted the challenge despite understanding its apparent impossibility, his heroic nature compelling him to attempt the quest rather than admit defeat or abandon his mother to Polydectes' unwelcome attentions. However, the young hero's divine heritage attracted the attention of several Olympian deities who recognized both his potential value and the justice of his cause. These divine patrons provided Perseus with supernatural equipment and guidance that would make his seemingly impossible mission achievable. Athena's contribution proved particularly crucial, as the goddess of wisdom understood the strategic challenges involved in confronting an enemy whose direct observation meant instant death. She provided Perseus with a polished bronze shield whose reflective surface would allow him to observe Medusa's location and movements without looking directly at the Gorgon's face. The shield's construction incorporated divine metallurgy that created a perfect mirror finish capable of providing clear images even in poor lighting conditions. Hermes supplied Perseus with winged sandals that would allow him to approach and retreat from Medusa's lair with supernatural speed, their divine construction enabling flight through air or movement across any terrain without leaving tracks or making noise. The sandals' wings responded to their wearer's thoughts, providing precise control over direction and velocity that would prove essential for navigating the dangerous approaches to the Gorgon's island stronghold. The messenger god also provided Perseus with an adamantine sickle capable of cutting through any substance, including the supernatural materials that composed Medusa's body and the bronze scales that protected her neck. The weapon's edge maintained perfect sharpness regardless of use, while its curved design allowed for precise cutting motions that could sever a head with a single stroke if properly applied. Hades contributed his Helm of Invisibility, the same artifact that had served him during the Titanomachy, recognizing that Perseus would need to approach Medusa undetected to have any chance of success. The helm's power extended beyond simple visual concealment to include complete sensory masking that prevented detection through sound, scent, or supernatural awareness. While wearing the helm, Perseus would become effectively non-existent to any form of perception until he chose to reveal himself. However, these divine gifts would prove useless without accurate information about Medusa's location and the specific circumstances of her situation. The Gorgons' island remained hidden from mortal knowledge, its location known only to certain supernatural beings who possessed ancient wisdom about the world's most dangerous places. Perseus's quest required him to seek out these knowledgeable entities and convince them to share information that they normally kept secret. The hero's search led him to the Grey Eye, three ancient sisters who shared a single eye and tooth between them, passing these organs back and forth as needed for sight and eating. These primordial beings possessed comprehensive knowledge about hidden places and dangerous creatures, their information gathered through centuries of observation and communication with other supernatural entities. However, the Grey jealously guarded their secrets and would not share information freely with any mortal, regardless of his divine heritage or heroic intentions. Perseus's approach to the Grey Eye required careful timing and quick reflexes, as he needed to steal their shared eye during the brief moment when it was being passed from one sister to another. The hero waited in concealment near their dwelling until the appropriate opportunity arose, then darted forward to snatch the eye before any of the sisters could react to his presence. With their shared organ in his possession, Perseus gained leverage that forced the Grey to negotiate for its return. The ancient sisters initially attempted to threaten and curse Perseus into returning their eye without providing the requested information, but the hero's determination and divine protection rendered their supernatural attacks ineffective. Eventually the Grey Eye agreed to reveal Medusa's location in exchange for the return of their eye, though they warned Perseus that knowledge of the Gorgon's whereabouts would not guarantee his survival of an encounter with her. Armed with divine equipment and accurate intelligence, Perseus flew across the Mediterranean toward the desolate island, where the three Gorgon sisters had made their lair. The island's appearance reflected the supernatural corruption that the Gorgon's presence had inflicted upon the natural environment. Its vegetation withered and its wildlife transformed into stone statues that bore expressions of terror frozen at the moment of their petrification. The very air seemed thick with malevolent energy that made breathing difficult and created an oppressive atmosphere of dread. The Gorgons themselves dwelt in a cave system that extended deep into the island's interior, its passages lined with the petrified remains of previous visitors who had sought to challenge or study the sisters. Medusa occupied the deepest chamber, her location providing maximum protection from potential attackers, while ensuring that her deadly gaze could not accidentally affect her immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, who possessed immunity to each other's petrifying abilities. Perseus's approach required navigating through the outer caves where Stheno and Euryale maintained their vigil, their supernatural senses capable of detecting intruders despite the Helm of Invisibility's protection. The hero's divine equipment allowed him to move silently through the passages, but the immortal Gorgon's awareness extended beyond normal sensory perception to include detection of life force and hostile intent that could penetrate most forms of concealment. The young hero's strategy involved timing his approach to coincide with the sisters' rest period, when their vigilance would be reduced and their attention focused inward rather than on potential external threats. Perseus waited outside the cave system for several days, observing the Gorgon's routines and identifying the optimal moment for his infiltration. His patience reflected both strategic wisdom and the understanding that hasty action would likely result in discovery and death. When Perseus finally entered the cave system, he found all three Gorgon sisters sleeping in Medusa's chamber. their serpentine hair writhing slowly even in slumber, while their bronze wings remained folded against their backs. The hero's approach to Medusa required careful navigation around her sisters, while maintaining his position relative to his shield's reflective surface, as any direct glimpse of the Gorgon's face would result in instant petrification regardless of his divine heritage. Using Athena's shield as a mirror, Perseus positioned himself above the sleeping Medusa and raised Hermes' adamantine sickle for the killing stroke. The weapon's divine properties allowed it to cut through Medusa's supernatural defences as easily as ordinary flesh, severing her head with a single precise motion that prevented any sound or struggle that might have awakened her sisters. The decapitation occurred so quickly that Medusa never realized she was under attack, her death coming as peacefully as natural sleep. The moment of Medusa's death triggered supernatural phenomena that reflected her unique nature and divine origins. From her severed neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse whose father was Poseidon, and Chrysa, a giant warrior whose golden sword gleamed with divine light. These beings had been conceived during Poseidon's union with Medusa, before her transformation into a monster, their birth delayed until their mother's death released them from her corrupted body. Perseus quickly secured Medusa's head in a special bag that prevented its deadly gaze from affecting him or others, while the birth of Pegasus and Chrysa awakened Stheno and Euryale, who immediately began pursuing the hero with supernatural speed and fury. The immortal Gorgons' rage at their sister's death drove them to pursue Perseus with relentless determination, their flight capabilities allowing them to match his winged sandal's speed, while their knowledge of local geography gave them advantages in predicting his escape routes. The chase extended across the Mediterranean as Perseus fled toward more populated regions, where divine intervention might provide additional protection from the pursuing Gorgons. His flight path took him over various islands and coastal regions, where inhabitants who witnessed the aerial pursuit would later create legends about flying monsters and divine heroes that would influence local religious traditions for centuries to come. During his return journey, Perseus encountered Andromeda, the daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia of Ethiopia, chained to a cliff face as a sacrifice to appease the sea monster Cetus. The princess's predicament resulted from her mother's boastful claim that Andromeda's beauty exceeded that of the Nereids, sea nymphs whose vanity had been offended by such comparison. The Nereids had complained to Poseidon, who had responded by sending Cetus to ravage the Ethiopian coast until suitable compensation was provided for the insult. Perseus's arrival at the scene coincided with Cetus's approach to claim his intended victim, the sea monster's massive form creating waves that crashed against the cliff face, while his roars echoed across the water with supernatural volume. The creature's appearance combined features of various marine predators, his whale-like body supporting multiple heads that snapped independently, while his fins generated whirlpools capable of destroying entire ships. The hero's decision to rescue Andromeda reflected both his natural chivalry and his recognition that such an act would demonstrate proper heroic behaviour while potentially gaining valuable allies in the region. Perseus negotiated quickly with Cepheus and Cassiopeia, securing their promise of Andromeda's hand in marriage in exchange for his intervention against Cetus, though the urgency of the situation prevented detailed discussion of terms or conditions. Perseus's battle with Cetus showcased the full range of abilities that his divine equipment provided, as the sea monster's size and aquatic nature presented challenges that required both aerial mobility and supernatural weapons to overcome. The hero's initial attacks focused on the creature's eyes, using Medusa's head to petrify portions of Cetus's body, while avoiding the monster's snapping jaws and thrashing tentacles. The petrification process worked slowly on such a massive creature, requiring multiple exposures to complete the transformation. The sea monster's death throes created massive disturbances in the surrounding waters, while his gradual transformation to stone produced a new island whose unusual rock formations would puzzle geographers for generations. Perseus's victory established his reputation as a hero, capable of defeating seemingly impossible opponents, while his marriage to Andromeda created political alliances that would prove valuable during his later adventures and eventual rule of various kingdoms. Perseus's triumphant return to Seriphos with Medusa's head had demonstrated that even the most impossible heroic feats could be accomplished through divine favour, strategic thinking, and unwavering courage. However, his individual achievement represented only one example of the heroic potential that existed during this age of legendary figures. The greatest collective heroic enterprise of the era would emerge from the complex political situation in Iolcos, where rightful succession had been disrupted by fraternal betrayal and usurpation of royal authority. Jason's claim to the throne of Iolcos derived from his father Aeson's legitimate right to rule the kingdom, her inheritance that should have passed smoothly from one generation to the next, according to established customs of royal succession. However, Aeson's brother Peleus had seized power through a combination of political maneuvering and military force, his coup eliminating the rightful heir and establishing a reign based on usurpation rather than legitimate authority. The circumstances of this takeover reflected the kind of political instability that characterized many kingdoms during the heroic age, where personal ambition often overrode traditional laws of inheritance and divine sanction. Peleus's rule had initially appeared secure, as his control over the kingdom's military forces and administrative apparatus provided the practical power necessary to maintain his position, regardless of its questionable legitimacy. The usurper had systematically eliminated potential rivals and consolidated his authority through a network of loyal supporters who benefited from his patronage. However, Peleus remained haunted by the knowledge that his reign lacked divine approval and that Aeson's surviving son represented a permanent threat to his continued rule. The threat materialized when Jason reached adulthood and returned to Iolcos to claim his rightful inheritance. The young prince had been raised in secret by the centaur Chiron, whose wisdom and knowledge of heroic traditions had prepared Jason for the challenges he would face in reclaiming his throne. Chiron's education had encompassed not only martial skills and strategic thinking, but also the diplomatic abilities and moral authority that would be essential for legitimate kingship. The centaur's reputation for producing exceptional heroes added weight to Jason's credentials while providing him with connections to the broader heroic community. Jason's arrival in Iolcos created immediate tension, as his obvious noble bearing and growing reputation made it impossible for Peleus to dismiss him as an insignificant pretender. The young prince's supporters began gathering around him, including members of the nobility who had chafed under Peleus's rule, and common citizens who recognized the justice of his claim. The situation threatened to develop into civil war, unless Peleus could find a way to eliminate his nephew without creating a martyr whose death might inspire further rebellion. Peleus's solution demonstrated the cunning that had enabled his original seizure of power, as he devised a challenge that would remove Jason from the kingdom, while providing an honourable excuse for the young man's absence. The usurper announced that he would recognise Jason's claim to the throne if the prince could accomplish a feat worthy of his royal heritage, retrieving the golden fleece from the distant kingdom of Colchis. This quest appeared virtually impossible to complete, as Colchis lay at the far end of the Black Sea, protected by treacherous waters, hostile peoples, and supernatural guardians that had defeated all previous attempts to steal the fleece. The Golden Fleece itself possessed a history that connected it to divine intervention and heroic sacrifice. The fleece had belonged to a miraculous ram sent by Zeus to rescue Phrixus and Helle, the children of King Athamas, from their murderous stepmother Ino. The ram's golden wool gleamed with supernatural light, while its ability to fly and speak marked it as a creature of obvious divine origin. During the rescue flight, Hel had fallen from the ram's back into the strait that would thereafter bear her name, the Hellespont. but Phrixus had reached safety in Colchis, where King Aeetes had welcomed him and accepted his sacrifice of the ram to Zeus. Aeetes had preserved the golden fleece as both a religious relic and a symbol of his kingdom's divine protection, hanging it from an oak tree in a sacred grove dedicated to Ares. The fleece's presence in Colchis had brought prosperity and military success to the kingdom, its supernatural properties ensuring favourable harvests and victory in battle against neighbouring peoples. However, these benefits came with the responsibility of protecting the fleece from theft, a duty that Aeetes took seriously given the dire consequences that its loss might bring to his realm. The grove's defences reflected both human ingenuity and supernatural assistance, as Aeetes had enlisted the aid of various divine and monstrous entities to ensure the fleece's security. The most formidable of these guardians was a massive serpent that never slept, its multiple heads maintaining constant vigilance, while its venomous breath created a poisonous atmosphere that killed most creatures before they could approach the sacred tree. The serpent's scales provided immunity to conventional weapons, while its supernatural senses could detect intruders from great distances regardless of their stealth abilities. Jason's acceptance of Peleus' challenge demonstrated either remarkable courage or dangerous naivety, as the prince seemed to understand the quest's difficulty without fully grasping its apparent impossibility. However, his divine heritage through his connection to Hermes provided him with supernatural charisma that would prove crucial for assembling the kind of extraordinary crew necessary for such an ambitious expedition. The quest's reputation for impossibility actually worked in Jason's favour, as it attracted heroes who sought to test themselves against the ultimate challenge, while gaining immortal glory through participation in such a legendary enterprise. The assembly of the Argonauts, named after their ship the Argo, represented the greatest gathering of heroic talent in the known world. Jason's call for volunteers attracted figures whose individual reputations would have made any of them suitable leaders for lesser expeditions, yet all accepted his authority and agreed to follow his command during the quest. This unprecedented cooperation among naturally competitive heroes reflected both the expedition's unique nature and Jason's remarkable ability to inspire loyalty and coordinate diverse personalities toward a common goal. Heracles joined the expedition despite his ongoing labours for King Eurystheus, recognising that participation in such a legendary quest would enhance his own heroic reputation while providing opportunities for the kind of extraordinary adventures that suited his supernatural strength and combat abilities. The son of Zeus brought not only his incredible physical power, but also his experience with impossible challenges and his knowledge of various monsters and supernatural threats that the expedition might encounter during its journey. Orpheus accepted Jason's invitation because the quest promised to take him to distant lands, where he could study new musical traditions and test his legendary abilities against unfamiliar challenges. The son of Apollo possessed powers over music and poetry that could calm savage beasts, charm hostile humans, and even influence natural phenomena through these supernatural harmonies he created. His presence on the expedition would provide both practical benefits during dangerous encounters and cultural enrichment during the long periods of travel between adventures. The Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux brought their complementary skills as master horseman and boxer respectively, their divine heritage as sons of Zeus providing them with supernatural abilities that would prove valuable in various situations. Castor's expertise with horses and cavalry tactics would be essential for any land-based portions of the journey, while Pollux's boxing skills and general combat prowess would contribute to the expedition's fighting capabilities. Their close relationship as twins provided the Argonauts with a model of cooperation and mutual support that would influence the entire crew's dynamics. Atalanta's inclusion in the expedition broke traditional gender barriers while adding archery skills that rivaled those of Artemis herself. The huntress had proven her heroic credentials through various adventures and competitions, her speed and accuracy with the bow making her one of the most formidable warriors of her generation, regardless of gender. Her presence among the Argonauts demonstrated Jason's willingness to prioritize ability over convention, while providing the expedition with specialized skills that might prove crucial during specific challenges. Theseus contributed his experience as a monster slayer, and his reputation for solving complex puzzles and navigating dangerous situations through intelligence rather than brute force. The Athenian hero's adventures in his own kingdom had prepared him for the kind of varied challenges that the expedition would likely encounter, while his political connections provided potential diplomatic advantages if the Argonauts needed to negotiate with foreign rulers or supernatural entities. The ship Argo itself represented a masterpiece of divine craftsmanship, its construction supervised by Athena and incorporating materials that provided supernatural capabilities essential for the quest's success. The vessel's keel contained wood from the sacred oak of Dodona, Zeus's oracular site, giving the ship prophetic abilities that would guide the Argonauts through dangerous waters and warn them of approaching threats. The Argo's construction combined the finest mortal shipbuilding techniques with divine enhancements that made it faster, stronger, and more seaworthy than any conventional vessel. The ship's figurehead bore the carved image of Hera, whose support for Jason's quest reflected her ongoing conflict with Peleus over his neglect of her worship. The goddess had taken personal interest in ensuring the expedition's success, viewing Jason's triumph as an opportunity to punish the usurper while demonstrating her power to both mortals and other deities. Hera's divine favour would manifest throughout the journey in the form of favourable winds, protection from supernatural threats, and guidance through difficult decisions. The Argonauts' departure from Iolcos created a spectacle that drew observers from across the Greek world, as news of the expedition had spread rapidly through the networks of traders, travellers and storytellers who connected distant communities. The ship's launch required careful timing to take advantage of optimal weather conditions and divine favour, while the crew's final preparations included sacrifices to various deities whose assistance would be crucial for the journey's success. The expedition's early stages took the Argonauts through familiar waters along the Greek coast, where they could test their ship's capabilities and refine their crew coordination before venturing into the unknown dangers of the Black Sea. These initial portions of the journey provided opportunities for the heroes to establish working relationships and develop the kind of mutual trust that would be essential when facing life-threatening challenges in distant lands. Their first significant challenge came at the island of Lemnos, where they encountered a population composed entirely of women who had murdered all the island's men in revenge for their husbands' infidelity with Thracian captives. The Lemnian women, led by Queen Hypsipyle, initially planned to kill the Argonauts as well, but Jason's diplomatic skills and the crew's obvious heroic status convinced them to provide hospitality instead of hostility. The extended stay on Lemnos allowed the heroes to rest and resupply, while establishing relationships that would provide them with allies and information for the remainder of their journey. The departure from Lemnos proved difficult, as many of the Argonauts had formed romantic attachments with the island's women and were reluctant to continue the dangerous quest. Heracles finally forced the issue by threatening to leave without his companions, his determination to continue the mission shaming the others into abandoning their comfortable situation for the uncertainties that lay ahead. This incident demonstrated the kind of leadership challenges that Jason would face throughout the expedition, as managing the diverse personalities and motivations of his crew required constant vigilance and occasional decisive action. The Argonauts' passage through the Hellespont brought them into contact with King Cyzicus of the Doliones, a young ruler whose hospitality and noble character made him a natural ally for the heroes. Cyzicus provided the expedition with supplies and information about the dangers they would face in the Black Sea, while his friendship with Jason created diplomatic connections that might prove valuable during future adventures. However, this promising relationship ended in tragedy when the Argonauts, returning to the harbour after being blown back by contrary winds during the night, were mistaken for pirates by Cyzicus's guards. The resulting battle occurred in darkness and confusion, with neither side initially recognizing their opponent's true identity. The fighting continued until dawn revealed the horrible mistake, but by then Cyzicus lay dead by Jason's own hand, killed in single combat while defending his city from what he believed to be a pirate attack. The young king's death created the first major moral crisis of the expedition, as the heroes struggled with guilt over killing an innocent ally while recognizing that the tragic mistake had resulted from circumstances beyond anyone's control. The funeral rites for Cyzicus required the Argonauts to remain in port for several days, during which time they honoured the fallen king with games and sacrifices that demonstrated their respect for his memory, while seeking divine forgiveness for their unintentional crime. The delay also provided an opportunity for the crew to reflect on the dangerous nature of their quest and the high stakes involved in their mission, as the death of such a noble figure reminded them that even heroes could fall victim to fate and misunderstanding. The expedition's most harrowing early adventure occurred during their encounter with the Harpies, monstrous bird women who had been tormenting the blind prophet Phineus as punishment for revealing too much divine knowledge to mortals. The Harpies possessed human heads and torsos attached to the bodies and wings of enormous vultures, their appearance combining feminine beauty with predatory menace in ways that reflected their dual nature as both divine messengers and instruments of punishment. Phineus's torment involved the constant theft and contamination of his food by the Harpies, who would swoop down whenever he attempted to eat and either carry away his meals or befoul them with their excrement. The prophet's resulting starvation had reduced him to a skeletal figure whose prophetic abilities remained intact, despite his physical deterioration, his suffering serving as a warning about the dangers of revealing divine secrets to unauthorized recipients. The Argonauts' intervention in Phineus's situation required careful consideration of the moral and practical implications involved in interfering with divine punishment. However, the prophet's obvious suffering and his potential value as a source of information about their route to Colchis convinced Jason that the risk was justified. The task of driving away the Harpies fell to the winged sons of Boreas, Calais and Zetes, whose ability to fly made them the only crew members capable of engaging the monsters in aerial combat. The battle between the Boreads and the Harpies extended across the sky above Phineus's island, the combatants' supernatural speed creating wind patterns that disrupted normal weather, while their aerial maneuvers produced spectacles that amazed the watching Argonauts. Calais and Zetes pursued the Harpies with relentless determination, their divine heritage providing them with the stamina necessary to maintain the chase, despite the monsters' attempts to escape through various aerial tactics and evasive maneuvers. The conflict's resolution came through divine intervention rather than military victory, as Iris, the rainbow goddess and messenger of the gods, appeared to negotiate a compromise that would end Phineus's torment without requiring the Harpies' destruction. The agreement specified that the monsters would cease their persecution of the prophet in exchange for the Boreads ending their pursuit, a solution that satisfied divine justice while providing practical relief for all parties involved. Phineus's gratitude for his liberation led him to provide the Argonauts with crucial information about the most dangerous portion of their route, the passage through the Symplegades, or clashing rocks, that guarded the entrance to the Black Sea. These supernatural barriers consisted of two massive stone formations that crashed together at irregular intervals, their movements controlled by divine forces that sought to prevent unauthorized passage into the waters beyond. The rock's collision created tremendous noise and generated waves that could destroy even the largest ships, while their timing remained unpredictable enough to make safe passage appear impossible. The prophet's advice involved sending a dove ahead of the Argo to test the rock's timing, as the bird's speed would allow it to attempt passage with minimal risk, while providing information about the interval between collisions. If the dove survived its passage, the Argonauts would have a brief window during which they could row with maximum effort to clear the rocks before they closed again. This strategy required perfect coordination and timing, as any hesitation or error would result in the ship's destruction and the expedition's failure. The attempt to pass through these simple gates created one of the most dramatic moments of the entire quest, as the Argonauts watched their test dove approach the rocks while knowing that their own fate depended on the bird's success or failure. The dove's passage through the closing gap succeeded by the narrowest possible margin, losing only its tail feathers to the rock's collision, but this partial success provided the heroes with the timing information they needed for their own attempt. The Argo's passage required every crew member to row with superhuman effort, while Jason steered the ship through the narrow gap with precision that allowed no margin for error. The rocks began closing as the ship entered the passage, their massive weight creating pressure waves that threatened to crush the vessel even without direct contact. Athena's divine assistance proved crucial at the critical moment, as the goddess pushed the ship forward with just enough additional speed to clear the rocks before they could complete their collision. The successful passage through the simple gates marked a turning point in the expedition, as the Argonauts had overcome the most dangerous obstacle on their route, while demonstrating the kind of coordination and determination that would be necessary for their ultimate success. The rock's failure to destroy the Argo also fulfilled an ancient prophecy that predicted the simple gates would become permanently fixed in place once a ship successfully passed between them, ensuring that future travellers would face no similar obstacle. The founding of Thebes emerged from circumstances that would establish a pattern of divine intervention and mortal consequence that would plague the city for generations. Cadmus, a Phoenician prince, had been sent by his father, King Agenor, to search for his sister Europa, who had been abducted by Zeus in the form of a bull. The god's transformation and subsequent seduction of Europa had taken her far from her homeland, making any rescue attempt virtually impossible, though Agenor could not have known this when he dispatched his sons to retrieve their sister. Cadmus's quest led him across the Mediterranean, following false leads and pursuing rumours that gradually took him further from his original homeland, while consuming years of fruitless searching. The oracle at Delphi finally provided Cadmus with divine guidance, though not the answer he had hoped to receive. Apollo's priestess informed him that his search for Europa was destined to fail, but that he would found a great city that would become one of the most powerful in Greece. The prophecy instructed him to follow a cow, marked with distinctive white markings, until the animal lay down to rest, then establish his city at that precise location. This divine command required Cadmus to abandon his original mission and accept a completely different destiny, demonstrating the way that divine will could redirect mortal plans, regardless of personal desires or family obligations. Cadmus discovered the prophesied cow among the herds of King Pelagon in Phocis, the animal's white markings clearly identifying it as the beast mentioned in Apollo's oracle. The cow's behaviour seemed guided by supernatural intelligence, as it led Cadmus and his companions through unfamiliar territory, with apparent purpose rather than wandering randomly in search of pasture. The animal's route took them through mountainous regions and across rivers, following paths that seemed designed to test the followers' determination, while leading them toward their destined location. When the cow finally lay down to rest on a hill overlooking a fertile plain, Cadmus recognized that this spot would become the site of his future city. The location offered natural defensive advantages while providing access to water sources and agricultural land that would support a growing population. However, the immediate area was not uninhabited, as Cadmus would soon discover when he attempted to perform the sacrificial rituals necessary to claim the land according to proper religious protocols. The spring that provided water for the sacrificial ceremony was guarded by a massive serpent sacred to Ares, the god of war. This creature had been placed there by the god to protect the sacred waters from unauthorized use, its presence serving as both a guardian and a test for anyone who sought to establish themselves in the region. The serpent's size exceeded that of any natural snake, its length stretching across the entire spring while its head rose to the height of a man standing upright. Its scales gleamed with metallic luster that suggested supernatural toughness, while its eyes blazed with intelligence that marked it as more than a mere animal. When Cadmus's companions approached the spring to draw water for the sacrifice, the serpent attacked without warning, its massive coils crushing several men while its venomous fangs delivered fatal bites to others who attempted to flee. The creature's supernatural strength allowed it to lift grown men from the ground and hurl them against rocks with enough force to shatter bones, while its speed made escape virtually impossible once it had identified intruders in its territory. The attack eliminated most of Cadmus's followers within moments, leaving the prince to face the monster alone with only his weapons and divine favour for protection. The battle between Cadmus and the serpent required both physical courage and strategic thinking, as the creature's size and supernatural abilities made direct confrontation extremely dangerous. The prince used his spear to keep the serpent at a distance while manoeuvring around the spring's perimeter, seeking opportunities to strike at vulnerable points without exposing himself to the creature's crushing coils or venomous bite. The fight continued for hours, with both combatants displaying remarkable endurance as they tested each other's defences and sought decisive advantages. Cadmus finally managed to pin the serpent's head to an oak tree with his spear, the weapon's bronze point penetrating the creature's skull and embedding itself so deeply in the wood that the monster could not break free. The serpent's death throes shook the entire tree and created tremors in the surrounding ground, while its final hiss echoed across the valley with supernatural volume that announced the Guardian's defeat to any supernatural beings who might be observing the conflict. However, killing Ares' sacred serpent created a debt that required divine resolution, as the destruction of the god's guardian could not go unpunished regardless of the circumstances that had necessitated the act. Athena appeared to Cadmus as he stood over the serpent's corpse, recognizing that the prince had acted in legitimate self-defense, while understanding that divine justice required some form of compensation for the creature's death. The goddess provided Cadmus with instructions that would both satisfy Ares' demand for recompense and provide the prince with the means to populate his future city. Athena commanded Cadmus to remove the serpent's teeth and plant half of them in the ground like seeds, warning him to be prepared for the consequences of this action. The teeth possessed supernatural properties derived from their connection to Ares. Their planting would produce warriors who would emerge from the earth fully grown and armed for battle. These Spartoi, or sown men, would serve as both a test of Cadmus's worthiness to rule and a potential source of citizens for his new city, though their creation would also establish the violent tendencies that would characterize Theban history. When Cadmus planted the serpent's teeth according to Athena's instructions, the ground immediately began to churn and crack as the buried teeth transformed into living beings. Armed warriors emerged from the soil with bronze weapons and armor gleaming, their eyes blazing with the same supernatural intelligence that had characterized their serpent progenitor. These Spartoi possessed no memory of previous existence and no loyalty to any mortal authority, their only instinct being to fight and establish dominance through combat. The newly created warriors immediately began fighting among themselves, their aggressive nature making cooperation impossible despite their shared origin. Cadmus watched from a safe distance as the Spartoi engaged in a battle royale that eliminated all but 5 of their number, these survivors proving their superiority through combat skill and tactical intelligence that set them apart from their defeated brothers. The violence of their emergence and immediate conflict established the pattern of internal strife that would plague Thebes throughout its history. The 5 surviving Spartoi eventually recognized Cadmus as their legitimate ruler, their acceptance of his authority based on his role in their creation and his demonstration of courage in defeating their serpent ancestor. These warriors became the founders of Thebes' noble families, their descendants forming the aristocratic class that would govern the city for generations. However, Their violent origins ensured that conflict and bloodshed would remain constant themes in Theban politics, as the Spartoi's aggressive nature passed to their children and influenced the city's entire social structure. Cadmus's marriage to Harmonia, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, represented an attempt to balance the violent influences that had shaped Thebes' founding with more positive divine connections. Harmonia's dual heritage combined the martial prowess of her father with the beauty and love associated with her mother, her presence in Thebes potentially offering a moderating influence on the city's aggressive tendencies. The wedding ceremony attracted all the Olympian gods, who brought magnificent gifts that demonstrated their approval of the union while establishing Thebes as a city with strong divine connections. However, the gifts presented at the wedding would prove to be mixed blessings that carried curses alongside their obvious benefits. Athena's gift of a magnificent robe possessed supernatural beauty that enhanced the wearer's appearance while providing protection from physical harm. But the garment also carried a curse that would bring misfortune to any woman who wore it. Similarly, Aphrodite's necklace granted irresistible beauty and the power to inspire passionate love, but it also ensured that its wearer would experience tragic romantic entanglements that would destroy both herself and those who loved her. These cursed gifts would pass through generations of Theban royalty, their supernatural properties making them treasured heirlooms, while their hidden curses ensured that each generation would face disasters connected to their possession. The pattern established by these objects reflected the broader curse that would afflict the royal house of Thebes, as divine favour and divine punishment became inextricably linked in ways that made prosperity and disaster inseparable aspects of the city's destiny. Cadmus's reign over Thebes initially brought prosperity and growth to the new city, as his wise governance and divine connections attracted settlers from across the Greek world. The king's introduction of the Phoenician alphabet to Greece revolutionized communication and record-keeping, while establishing Thebes as a center of learning and culture. His military leadership, demonstrated through his victory over the serpent and his management of the Spartoi, provided security that allowed trade and agriculture to flourish under his protection. The royal couple's children inherited combinations of their parents' divine heritage that gave them exceptional abilities while also making them targets for the kind of divine attention that could prove dangerous. Their daughters became priestesses and queens who spread Theban influence through strategic marriages, while their sons established military traditions that would make Thebes one of Greece's most formidable military powers. However, each generation also inherited aspects of the curse that had been embedded in the city's founding, ensuring that success would always be accompanied by corresponding disasters. The curse's most dramatic manifestation would come through the story of Oedipus, whose birth several generations after Cadmus would fulfill prophecies that had been set in motion by the city's violent founding. Laius, who ruled Thebes as Cadmus's descendant, received a prophecy from the Delphic oracle that warned him his son would kill him and marry his wife, Jocasta. This prediction reflected the ongoing influence of the divine forces that had shaped Thebes' destiny, as the violence embedded in the city's origins continued to generate new tragedies that would test each generation's ability to escape their inherited fate. Laius's attempt to prevent the prophecy's fulfillment demonstrated the futility of trying to circumvent divine will through mortal planning. When Jocasta gave birth to a son, Laius ordered the infant's ankles pierced and bound, then commanded the servant to abandon the child on Mount Cithaeron, where exposure would ensure his death. The king's plan seemed to eliminate the prophesied threat, while avoiding the direct murder that might have brought divine punishment for infanticide. But his precautions proved inadequate against the complex workings of fate. The servant charged with abandoning the infant could not bring himself to leave a helpless baby to die from exposure, instead giving the child to a shepherd from Corinth who was tending flocks on the mountain. This act of mercy, motivated by natural human compassion, became the first link in a chain of events that would ultimately fulfill the very prophecy that Laius had sought to prevent. the shepherd's decision to save the child reflected the way that individual moral choices could serve larger patterns of destiny, even when the actors remained unaware of their roles in cosmic plans. The Corinthian shepherd brought the abandoned infant to King Polybus and Queen Merope, who had been unable to have children of their own, and welcomed the opportunity to adopt a son who could serve as their heir. They named the child Oedipus, meaning swollen foot, in reference to the injuries caused by the binding of his ankles, though they never revealed the circumstances of his adoption. The royal couple raised Oedipus as their natural child, providing him with the education and training appropriate for a future king while remaining ignorant of his true parentage and the prophecy that surrounded his birth. Oedipus grew to maturity, believing himself to be the natural son of Polybus and Merope, his exceptional intelligence and leadership abilities marking him as a worthy heir to the Corinthian throne. However, a chance remark by a drunken guest at a banquet suggested that he might not be the king's natural son, planting seeds of doubt that would ultimately drive him to seek the truth about his origins. The young prince's decision to consult the Delphic oracle reflected both his desire for certainty about his parentage and his confidence that divine wisdom could resolve his doubts. The oracle's response provided Oedipus with information that was both accurate and misleading, as Apollo's priestess revealed the prophecy about patricide and incest without identifying the specific individuals involved. The prediction that Oedipus would kill his father and marry his mother seemed to refer to Polybus and Merope, prompting the young man to flee Corinth in order to prevent the fulfillment of such a horrific fate. His decision to leave his adopted homeland demonstrated both moral courage and tragic irony, as his attempt to avoid the prophecy actually set in motion the events that would fulfill it. Oedipus's journey away from Corinth took him along the road toward Thebes, where a chance encounter at a narrow crossroads would begin the fulfillment of his destined fate. At a place where 3 roads met, his path intersected with that of an older man travelling with a small retinue of servants, the encounter creating a traffic situation that required one party to yield to the other. The older man's imperious demand that Oedipus step aside and allow the royal party to pass first reflected the kind of aristocratic arrogance that characterized many rulers of the heroic age. Oedipus's refusal to yield reflected both his own royal upbringing and his natural resistance to unjustified authority, as he saw no reason why he should defer to a stranger simply because that person travelled with more servants. The confrontation escalated when one of the older man's attendants struck Oedipus with a goad, the physical assault triggering a violent response that would have tragic consequences for both parties. The young man's retaliation killed not only the servant who had struck him but also the older man himself, whose death occurred so quickly that neither participant realised they were fulfilling an ancient prophecy. The dead man was Laius, Oedipus's biological father, though neither participant in the fatal encounter possessed this crucial knowledge. The king of Thebes had been travelling to consult the Delphic oracle about the Sphinx that was terrorizing his kingdom, seeking divine guidance about how to eliminate the monster that was destroying his city's prosperity. His death at his son's hands fulfilled the first part of the prophecy while eliminating the only person who might have recognised Oedipus and revealed the truth about his origins. Oedipus continued his journey toward Thebes, unaware that he had just killed his father and ignorant of the additional prophecies that awaited fulfillment in the city ahead. His arrival at Thebes coincided with the city's desperate struggle against the Sphinx, a monster with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a woman whose intelligence exceeded that of most humans. The creature had positioned itself on a cliff, overlooking the main road to the city, where it posed riddles to travellers and devoured those who answered incorrectly. The Sphinx's riddle challenged travellers to identify what creature walked on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening, with incorrect answers resulting in immediate death and consumption. The monster's presence had effectively cut off trade and communication with Thebes, as few travellers were willing to risk the journey when failure to solve the riddle meant certain death. The city's economy had begun to collapse under the isolation. while the psychological impact of the Sphinx's presence had created an atmosphere of fear and desperation among the population. Creon, who had assumed temporary rule after Laius's death, had announced that whoever could defeat the Sphinx would receive the throne of Thebes and marriage to Queen Jocasta, the generous reward reflecting both the city's desperate situation and the apparent impossibility of the task. Many heroes had attempted to answer the Sphinx's riddle, but all had failed and been devoured, their deaths serving to reinforce the monster's reputation for invincibility while discouraging additional attempts. Oedipus approached the Sphinx with confidence based on his exceptional intelligence and his belief that careful reasoning could solve any puzzle, regardless of its apparent difficulty. When the monster posed its traditional riddle, the young man analysed the question methodically, recognizing that it described the stages of human life, rather than referring to an actual creature. His answer identified man as the being who crawls as an infant, walks upright as an adult, and uses a walking stick in old age, the correct response demonstrating the kind of analytical thinking that would characterize his approach to other challenges. The Sphinx's reaction to Oedipus's correct answer revealed the creature's supernatural nature, as it immediately hurled itself from the cliff, rather than face the consequences of its riddle being solved. The monster's death freed Thebes from its terror, while fulfilling the conditions that Creon had established for claiming the throne, making Oedipus king of the city and husband to Jocasta. The new king's triumph over the Sphinx established his reputation as a wise ruler capable of solving impossible problems, though it also completed the second part of the prophecy by making him his mother's husband. Oedipus's reign over Thebes initially brought prosperity and stability to the city, as his intelligence and administrative skills proved well suited for the complex challenges of governing a major Greek polis. His marriage to Jocasta produced 4 children who would play crucial roles in Thebes' future history: Eteocles and Polynices, twin sons who inherited their father's intelligence and ambition, and Antigone and Ismene, daughters whose moral courage would later be tested by the conflicts that would tear their family apart. The royal family's happiness and the city's prosperity continued for nearly 2 decades, during which Oedipus established himself as one of Greece's most effective rulers, while remaining ignorant of his true parentage and the prophetic implications of his marriage and children. However, the curse that had been embedded in Thebes' founding could not be permanently avoided, and divine justice would eventually demand recognition of the truth that had been hidden through circumstance and ignorance. The revelation of Oedipus's true identity began with a plague that struck Thebes with supernatural virulence, causing crops to fail, livestock to die, and the population to suffer from diseases that defied all attempts at treatment. The plague's intensity and resistance to normal remedies suggested divine causation, prompting Oedipus to send Creon to consult the Delphic oracle about the source of the city's affliction and the measures necessary to end it. The king's proactive response to the crisis demonstrated the same problem-solving approach that had enabled him to defeat the Sphinx, though this time the solution would prove far more personally devastating. Apollo's oracle revealed that the plague would continue until the murderer of Laius was identified and punished, the god's pronouncement indicating that the previous king's death had created a pollution that could only be cleansed through proper justice. This revelation began an investigation that would gradually uncover the truth about Oedipus's identity, while demonstrating the inexorable nature of divine justice and the impossibility of permanently escaping the consequences of one's actions, even when those actions had been performed in ignorance of their true significance. The greatest conflict of the heroic age began not with mortal ambition or territorial disputes, but with a divine beauty contest that would ultimately consume 2 civilizations and reshape the political landscape of the ancient world. The origins of the Trojan War traced back to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, a celebration that brought together gods and mortals in what should have been a joyous occasion, but instead became the catalyst for decades of bloodshed and heroic tragedy. Eris, the goddess of discord, had been deliberately excluded from the wedding festivities due to her reputation for causing trouble at social gatherings. Her exclusion reflected the other gods' understanding of her nature, as her presence at any celebration inevitably led to arguments, conflicts, and disruptions that could transform peaceful occasions into scenes of chaos and violence. However, this calculated snub only intensified Eris's desire for revenge, prompting her to devise a scheme that would create far more discord than her mere presence at the wedding could have achieved. The goddess crafted a golden apple of extraordinary beauty, its surface gleaming with supernatural radiance that immediately drew attention from anyone who observed it. Upon this perfect fruit, she inscribed the words "for the fairest," creating an ambiguous dedication that would inevitably provoke competition among the goddesses present at the celebration. Eris hurled this apple into the midst of the wedding feast, where it landed among the divine guests with an impact that seemed disproportionate to its physical weight, the psychological effect of its inscription immediately creating tension among the assembled deities. 3 goddesses immediately claimed the apple as rightfully theirs: Hera, Zeus's queen and goddess of marriage; Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom and warfare; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Each possessed legitimate grounds for considering herself the fairest among the immortals, their individual claims based on different aspects of divine perfection that made objective comparison virtually impossible. Hera's regal bearing and status as queen of the gods provided one standard of beauty, while Athena's combination of physical perfection with intellectual brilliance offered another. Aphrodite's very nature as the personification of beauty and desire created perhaps the strongest claim, though her rivals could argue that true fairness encompassed more than mere physical attraction. The dispute quickly escalated beyond polite disagreement to genuine divine conflict, as each goddess marshalled arguments for her superiority while dismissing her rivals' claims with increasing vehemence. The wedding celebration ground to a halt as the assembled gods chose sides, or attempted to remain neutral in a conflict that threatened to divide the entire Olympian pantheon. Zeus recognized that any decision he might make would create permanent enemies among the losing goddesses, while refusing to judge would allow the conflict to fester and potentially explode into open warfare among his family members. The king of the gods solved his dilemma by delegating the judgment to a mortal, reasoning that a human decision would shield him from direct responsibility while providing the goddesses with a verdict they would be compelled to accept. His choice fell upon Paris, a prince of Troy whose reputation for fairness and aesthetic judgment made him seem ideally suited for such a decision. Paris possessed the kind of refined sensibilities that came from royal education and exposure to the finest examples of art and beauty, while his status as a foreign prince meant he had no existing obligations to any of the competing goddesses that might bias his judgment. However, Zeus's selection of Paris also reflected the king's awareness that the young prince's decision would have far-reaching consequences for both divine and mortal realms. The judgment would not merely settle a dispute about divine beauty, but would also establish alliances and enmities that would influence future conflicts between gods and their mortal worshippers. The choice of a Trojan prince as judge ensured that the eventual verdict would have particular significance for Troy and its relationships with other Greek cities, though neither Zeus nor Paris could have anticipated the full scope of the consequences that would follow. The 3 goddesses appeared to Paris while he was tending sheep on Mount Ida, their sudden manifestation transforming the peaceful pastoral scene into a cosmic courtroom where divine beauty would be evaluated and ranked. Each goddess presented herself in her most magnificent form, their appearances calculated to emphasize the particular qualities that supported their claims to supreme beauty. The contest required Paris to look beyond surface attractiveness to consider the deeper meanings of fairness and the different types of perfection that each goddess represented. Hera presented herself with all the dignity and majesty appropriate to the queen of the gods, her bearing radiating the kind of authority and grace that commanded respect from both mortals and immortals. Her beauty reflected the ideal of mature feminine power, combining physical attractiveness with the wisdom and experience that came from centuries of ruling over divine and mortal affairs. To support her claim, Hera offered Paris dominion over all of Asia and Europe, promising him political power that would make him the greatest ruler in the known world. Her bribe appealed to the ambitious aspects of royal nature, while demonstrating the practical benefits that could flow from choosing the goddess who controlled marriage and legitimate authority. Athena's presentation emphasized the combination of physical perfection with intellectual brilliance that made her unique among the goddesses. Her beauty possessed a kind of austere perfection that reflected her virgin status and her dedication to wisdom rather than sensual pleasure. The goddess appeared in her full armor, the bronze and gold gleaming in the sunlight, while her grey eyes blazed with the kind of intelligence that could solve any problem or overcome any obstacle. Her offer to Paris involved victory in battle and wisdom in leadership, promising him the strategic abilities and military success that would make him the greatest warrior and general of his age. This bribe appealed to the heroic ideals that shaped aristocratic education, while offering practical advantages in the violent world of Bronze Age politics. Aphrodite's approach differed significantly from her rivals, as she chose to emphasize the sensual and emotional aspects of beauty rather than its connections to power or wisdom. Her appearance radiated the kind of irresistible attraction that could inspire passionate love, while her movements possessed a natural grace that seemed to make the very air around her shimmer with desire. The goddess understood that her greatest advantage lay not in competing with her rivals on their chosen grounds, but in offering something that neither political power nor military success could provide. Her promise to Paris involved the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, an offer that appealed to romantic ideals while providing the kind of personal fulfillment that political and military achievements could not guarantee. Paris's decision reflected both his personal values and his assessment of which offer would provide the greatest long-term satisfaction. The young prince possessed enough political awareness to understand the value of Hera's promised dominion and sufficient military training to appreciate Athena's offered victories, but his romantic nature and aesthetic sensibilities made Aphrodite's promise more appealing than the alternatives. His choice of the love goddess demonstrated the power of personal desire over practical considerations, though he could not have anticipated the full consequences of selecting romantic fulfillment over political or military advantage. The judgment's immediate aftermath created permanent enmities that would influence divine politics for generations to come. Hera and Athena's fury at their defeat transformed them into implacable enemies of Troy and its people, their wounded pride demanding revenge that would ultimately manifest in active support for Troy's enemies during the coming war. The goddess's resentment extended beyond Paris himself to encompass his entire family and city, creating divine opposition that would prove crucial in determining the conflict's eventual outcome. Aphrodite's triumph obligated her to fulfill her promise by helping Paris obtain the love of the world's most beautiful woman, who was Helen, the daughter of Zeus and Leda. Helen's extraordinary beauty had attracted suitors from across the Greek world, her hand in marriage becoming a prize that could establish political alliances and enhance the prestige of whichever hero succeeded in winning her affection. Her eventual marriage to Menelaus of Sparta had seemed to resolve the competition while creating a powerful alliance between Sparta and the other Greek kingdoms whose princes had sought her hand. However, Helen's marriage to Menelaus had been arranged through her mortal father Tyndareus, rather than reflecting her personal choice, the political considerations that influenced royal marriages often overriding individual preferences about romantic partners. Her situation as the wife of a king she had not chosen created the kind of emotional vulnerability that Aphrodite could exploit to fulfill her promise to Paris. The goddess's intervention would transform Helen's dutiful acceptance of her arranged marriage into passionate love for the Trojan prince, though this divine manipulation would have consequences that extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Paris's arrival in Sparta occurred during Menelaus's absence on a diplomatic mission to Crete, the timing reflecting either remarkable coincidence or divine manipulation that created optimal conditions for the seduction. The Trojan prince's reception at the Spartan court followed the established protocols of guest friendship, with Helen serving as hostess in her husband's absence and providing the hospitality that custom demanded for visiting royalty. The social requirements of entertaining a foreign prince created opportunities for private conversation and personal interaction that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Aphrodite's influence manifested in the immediate attraction that developed between Paris and Helen, a connection transcending the polite interactions appropriate between host and guest to become genuine passion that overwhelmed their sense of duty and social obligation. The goddess's power over love and desire proved stronger than the bonds of marriage or the fear of political consequences, transforming Helen from a dutiful wife into a woman willing to abandon her husband, daughter, and kingdom for the sake of romantic fulfillment. The elopement occurred under cover of darkness, with Paris and Helen departing Sparta, accompanied by a substantial portion of the royal treasury that would finance their journey and new life together. The theft of Menelaus's wealth compounded the personal insult of his wife's abduction, with economic damage that provided additional motivation for seeking revenge. The couple's flight to Troy created a diplomatic crisis that demanded response from both Menelaus personally and the broader Greek community that had guaranteed Helen's marriage through the oath that her suitors had sworn before her wedding. The oath of Tyndareus had been devised by Odysseus as a solution to the problem of managing Helen's numerous suitors without creating permanent enmities among the rejected princes. The oath bound all of Helen's former suitors to defend her chosen husband against anyone who might attempt to steal her away, creating a mutual defense pact that theoretically prevented any of the disappointed suitors from using force to claim her for themselves. However, the oath's language also obligated the signatories to assist Menelaus in recovering his wife if she were abducted by outsiders, transforming Helen's elopement with Paris into a cause for collective Greek action. Menelaus's discovery of his wife's departure and the theft of his treasury prompted immediate consultation with his brother Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, whose political influence and military resources made him the natural leader for any collective Greek response. Agamemnon's support for his brother's cause reflected both family loyalty and his recognition that allowing foreign princes to abduct Greek queens would set a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the entire political system. The High King's decision to invoke the oath of Tyndareus transformed a personal dispute into a matter of collective Greek honour that demanded military resolution. The assembly of the Greek coalition required extensive diplomatic efforts to convince the various kings and princes to honour their obligations under the oath. Many of the potential participants had pressing concerns in their own kingdoms that made foreign military adventures unattractive, while others questioned whether Helen's apparent willingness to leave with Paris constituted genuine abduction rather than voluntary elopement. Agamemnon's success in overcoming these objections reflected both his political skills and the general recognition that Greek prestige required a strong response to Trojan defiance. The recruitment process revealed the complex motivations that drove individual heroes to join the expedition, as personal honour, political obligation and desire for glory combined in different proportions for different participants. Some, like Diomedes and Ajax, were motivated primarily by their oaths and their commitment to collective Greek action, while others saw the war as an opportunity to gain wealth, territory, or heroic reputation through military achievement. The diversity of motivations created potential sources of conflict within the coalition, though Agamemnon's leadership and the shared commitment to Greek honour provided sufficient unity for the expedition's initial phases. Achilles' recruitment required special efforts due to his mother Thetis's knowledge of the prophecy that predicted her son would die young if he participated in the war, though he would achieve immortal glory through his heroic deeds. The sea goddess's attempts to prevent Achilles from joining the expedition included disguising him as a woman and hiding him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Scyros. However, Odysseus's cunning enabled him to penetrate this disguise by presenting gifts that included weapons alongside feminine ornaments. Achilles' instinctive preference for the weapons revealing his true identity and warrior nature. The assembly of the Greek fleet at Aulis created logistical challenges that tested Agamemnon's organizational abilities while providing opportunities for the various contingents to establish working relationships before embarking for Troy. The gathering included over 1,000 ships carrying approximately 100,000 warriors, making it the largest military force ever assembled in the Greek world. The fleet's composition reflected the political structure of Bronze Age Greece, with each kingdom contributing forces proportional to its resources while maintaining its own command structure and tactical preferences. However, the expedition faced immediate difficulties when contrary winds prevented the fleet from departing Aulis, the adverse weather conditions persisting for weeks despite the seasonal patterns that should have provided favourable sailing conditions. The supernatural nature of these winds became apparent when the prophet Calchas revealed that Artemis was preventing the fleet's departure as punishment for Agamemnon's boast that he was a better hunter than the goddess herself. The divine intervention demonstrated the gods' continued involvement in mortal affairs while creating a crisis that threatened to dissolve the coalition before it could reach Troy. Calchas' solution to the crisis required Agamemnon to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia, to appease Artemis and secure favourable winds for the voyage. This demand created the first major moral crisis of the war, as the High King faced a choice between his paternal obligations and his duties as military commander. The sacrifice's necessity reflected the harsh realities of divine justice and the prices that mortals sometimes paid for divine favour, while Agamemnon's eventual agreement to perform the ritual demonstrated his commitment to the expedition's success, regardless of personal cost. The sacrifice of Iphigenia created lasting consequences that would influence the war's later phases and its aftermath, as Clytemnestra's fury at her daughter's death transformed the queen into an implacable enemy of her husband, whose desire for revenge would ultimately lead to Agamemnon's assassination. The ritual also established the pattern of divine intervention and human sacrifice that would characterize the entire conflict, as both sides would repeatedly face situations where military success required actions that violated normal moral constraints. The Greek fleet's arrival at Troy initiated a siege that would continue for 10 years, the extended duration reflecting both the city's formidable defences and the complex political and military factors that prevented either side from achieving decisive victory. Troy's location on a hill overlooking the Hellespont provided natural defensive advantages, while its massive walls, constructed with divine assistance during an earlier generation, created artificial barriers that conventional siege techniques could not overcome. The city's wealth and political connections also enabled it to secure allies from across Asia Minor, creating a coalition that could match Greek resources while fighting on familiar terrain. The siege's early phases involved the Greeks establishing a fortified camp on the beach, while conducting raids against Trojan allies and territories that provided the city with supplies and reinforcements. These preliminary operations served multiple purposes, including weakening Troy's support network, gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities, and providing opportunities for individual heroes to demonstrate their prowess in smaller-scale encounters. The pattern of raid and counter-raid created a grinding war of attrition that favoured neither side while consuming resources and lives on both sides of the conflict. Achilles emerged as the Greeks' most formidable warrior during these early engagements, his supernatural strength and combat skills making him virtually invincible in single combat, while his leadership abilities inspired his Myrmidons to achieve victories that seemed impossible for ordinary mortals. The son of Peleus and Thetis possessed physical capabilities that exceeded those of other heroes, his divine heritage manifesting in speed, strength, and endurance that allowed him to dominate battlefields, where even exceptional warriors struggled to survive. His bronze armour, forged by divine craftsmen, provided protection that complemented his natural abilities, while his weapons could penetrate any defence that mortal smiths could create. However, Achilles' greatest strength was also his greatest weakness, as his pride and sense of personal honour made him sensitive to slights that other warriors might have ignored or forgiven. His relationship with Agamemnon remained cordial during the siege's early phases, but the seeds of future conflict existed in their different approaches to leadership and their competing claims to precedence among the Greek forces. Achilles' individual prowess and divine heritage gave him legitimate grounds for considering himself the expedition's most valuable warrior, while Agamemnon's political position and overall command authority provided equally valid claims to supreme leadership. The conflict between these two paramount Greek leaders erupted during the war's 9th year over the disposition of Chryseis, a Trojan priestess who had been captured during a raid and awarded to Agamemnon as his share of the spoils. The girl's father, Chryseis, was a priest of Apollo who offered substantial ransom for his daughter's return, but Agamemnon's refusal to accept the payment reflected both his desire to keep his prize and his determination to demonstrate his authority over subordinates who might question his decisions. The High King's rejection of the ransom violated established customs regarding prisoner exchange, while insulting Apollo through the mistreatment of his priest. Apollo's response to this insult manifested as a plague that struck the Greek camp with supernatural virulence, the disease killing warriors and support personnel with equal efficiency, while resisting all attempts at medical treatment. The plague's divine origin became apparent when normal remedies proved ineffective, and the disease's pattern of spread defied natural explanation, prompting Calchas to identify its true cause and the measures necessary for its elimination. The prophet's revelation that Apollo demanded Chryseis' return created a direct challenge to Agamemnon's authority, while highlighting the costs of defying divine will. Agamemnon's eventual agreement to return Chryseis reflected his recognition that the plague would destroy the entire expedition if allowed to continue, but his demand for compensation created the crisis that would define the war's most crucial phase. The High King's insistence on receiving Achilles' prize, the captive Briseis, as replacement for his lost concubine, violated the principles of honour and fair distribution that governed heroic society. The seizure of Briseis represented more than simple theft of property. It constituted a public humiliation that questioned Achilles' status and valour, while demonstrating Agamemnon's willingness to abuse his authority for personal benefit. Achilles' response to this insult revealed the depth of his pride and the intensity of his commitment to personal honour over collective success. Rather than accepting the injustice or seeking private revenge, he withdrew from combat entirely, taking his Myrmidons with him and leaving the Greeks to face Trojan attacks without their most effective fighting force. This withdrawal reflected the heroic code that placed individual honour above group loyalty when the two came into conflict, though it also demonstrated the potential for personal disputes to undermine collective military efforts. The consequences of Achilles' withdrawal became apparent immediately, as Trojan forces under Hector's leadership launched aggressive attacks that drove the Greeks back toward their ships and threatened to end the siege through complete military defeat. Without Achilles' supernatural combat abilities and the elite Myrmidons' tactical excellence, the remaining Greek forces proved insufficient to maintain their previous dominance over Trojan defenders. The shift in military balance encouraged Troy's allies, while demoralizing Greek warriors who had grown accustomed to victory through Achilles' individual prowess. Hector's leadership of Troy's defense represented more than military strategy. It embodied the values of duty and sacrifice that would define the war's final phase and establish the moral framework for understanding heroic achievement. Unlike the individualistic pursuit of glory that motivated many Greek warriors, Hector fought primarily to protect his family and city, his motivations reflecting a more mature understanding of heroic responsibility that prioritized collective welfare over personal reputation. His relationship with his wife Andromache and infant son Astyanax provided emotional depth to his character, while highlighting the human costs of prolonged warfare that affected families on both sides of the conflict. The Trojan prince's military capabilities, while impressive by mortal standards, remained fundamentally limited by his human nature and the conventional weapons available to Bronze Age warriors. His bronze armour, though expertly crafted by Trojan smiths, could not match the divine protection that Achilles enjoyed. While his spear and sword, despite their excellent workmanship, lacked the supernatural properties that made certain heroic weapons capable of penetrating any defence. These limitations forced Hector to rely on tactical intelligence, physical conditioning, and inspirational leadership rather than overwhelming individual prowess, creating a leadership style that other mortals could emulate even if they could not match his specific achievements. The siege's continuation during Achilles' withdrawal created opportunities for other Greek heroes to demonstrate their capabilities while revealing the expedition's dependence on its greatest warrior. Diomedes emerged as the most effective replacement for Achilles, his divine favour from Athena providing supernatural strength and tactical insight that enabled him to achieve victories that approached those of the absent champion. During one memorable engagement, Diomedes actually wounded Aphrodite and Ares when they intervened directly in combat. His temporary elevation to near-divine status, allowing him to challenge immortal beings who sought to influence the battle's outcome through personal participation. Ajax the Greater provided the defensive backbone that prevented complete Greek collapse during their most difficult period, his massive shield and unwavering courage creating rallying points around which other warriors could organize effective resistance. The son of Telamon possessed physical strength that rivaled Achilles' own capabilities, though he lacked the speed and divine protection that made his rival virtually invincible. Ajax's fighting style emphasized endurance and defensive excellence over offensive brilliance, his ability to withstand prolonged attacks providing crucial time for wounded comrades to recover and for tactical situations to develop in Greek favour. Odysseus contributed strategic intelligence and diplomatic skills that complemented the more straightforward military approaches of his colleagues, his reputation for cunning and problem-solving making him invaluable for situations that required indirect solutions rather than direct confrontation. The king of Ithaca possessed a unique ability to understand enemy motivations and predict their likely responses to various Greek initiatives, his psychological insights proving as valuable as physical prowess for achieving tactical advantages. His role in maintaining coalition unity during periods of crisis demonstrated the importance of political leadership alongside military command for managing complex expeditions involving multiple independent kingdoms. However, these individual excellences could not fully compensate for Achilles' absence, as the psychological impact of the greatest warrior's withdrawal affected Greek morale in ways that tactical victories could not address. The common soldiers understood that their champions, however skilled, remained fundamentally mortal and vulnerable to the kind of wounds that could end careers or lives, while Achilles' near invincibility had provided a sense of security that conventional heroism could not replace. The Trojans' growing confidence reflected their recognition that Greek military superiority had been largely dependent on a single individual, whose pride had removed him from active participation. The crisis deepened when Trojan forces, emboldened by their recent successes, launched a massive assault that breached the Greek defensive walls and threatened to reach the ships drawn up on the beach. Hector's leadership of this attack demonstrated his tactical abilities while creating the most dangerous situation the Greeks had faced since arriving at Troy, as the loss of their fleet would have trapped the entire expedition in hostile territory without means of escape or resupply. The fighting around the ships involved desperate hand-to-hand combat, where individual heroism determined the outcome of engagements that could decide the entire war's fate. Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion and beloved friend, could no longer bear to watch Greek suffering while his leader maintained his prideful withdrawal from combat. The young warrior's emotional connection to both Achilles and the broader Greek cause created internal conflict between loyalty to his friend and duty to their common enterprise. His eventual decision to seek permission for independent action, reflecting the moral complexity that characterized many heroic choices. Patroclus understood that his intervention might anger Achilles, while recognizing that continued inaction would result in Greek defeat and the deaths of warriors who had become his comrades through years of shared hardship. Achilles' agreement to lend Patroclus his divine armor represented a compromise between his personal pride and his recognition of the crisis facing their expedition. The greatest of warriors could not bring himself to abandon his withdrawal completely, as doing so would have implied acceptance of Agamemnon's unjust treatment and validation of the High King's abuse of authority. However, his willingness to allow Patroclus to fight in his place demonstrated that his anger had not completely overcome his concern for Greek welfare, though the conditions he imposed on his friend's participation would prove tragically inadequate for the situation's demands. The divine armor's psychological impact on both armies exceeded its practical military value, as Trojan warriors who glimpsed the familiar bronze and gold assumed that Achilles himself had returned to combat. This misidentification created panic among Trojan ranks, while inspiring Greek forces to rally around what they believed was their champion's return, the armor's appearance alone shifting the battle's momentum before any actual fighting occurred. Patroclus' initial success in driving back Trojan forces validated Achilles' tactical judgment, while demonstrating the continued effectiveness of divine equipment when wielded by skilled warriors. However, Patroclus' success led him to exceed the limitations that Achilles had imposed, as the young warrior's enthusiasm for battle and his desire to maximize his impact drove him to pursue fleeing Trojans toward the city walls, rather than limiting his intervention to defensive actions around the Greek ships. This decision reflected both admirable courage and dangerous overconfidence, as Patroclus allowed his temporary advantages to convince him that he could achieve victories that were properly reserved for warriors of Achilles' caliber. His approach to Troy's walls brought him into direct confrontation with Hector, creating the kind of single combat between champions that often determined the outcome of larger engagements. The duel between Patroclus and Hector represented a clash between different types of heroic excellence, as the young Greek's divine equipment and supernatural inspiration faced the Trojan prince's experience, tactical skill, and desperate determination to protect his city. Patroclus fought with the kind of inspired fury that could temporarily elevate mortal warriors to near-divine levels of effectiveness, his attacks pressing Hector to the limits of his defensive capabilities while demonstrating the power that flowed from righteous anger and divine favour. However, the borrowed armour could not provide the kind of complete protection that Achilles' own divine heritage made possible, leaving Patroclus vulnerable to the kind of precise attack that exceptional skill could deliver. Hector's victory over Patroclus occurred through a combination of tactical patience and decisive action, as the Trojan prince absorbed his opponent's initial assault while seeking opportunities to exploit the small gaps in divine protection that remained accessible to mortal weapons. The killing blow came when Hector's spear found the single vulnerable point where Patroclus' borrowed armour failed to provide complete coverage, the bronze point penetrating flesh with enough force to cause immediately fatal wounds. The young warrior's death represented both a personal tragedy and a tactical disaster, as the Greeks lost an effective champion, while Hector claimed Achilles' divine armour as spoils of victory. The news of Patroclus' death and the loss of his divine armour created the emotional crisis that finally drove Achilles to abandon his withdrawal and return to active combat. The greatest of warriors experienced grief and rage that exceeded normal human emotions, his divine heritage amplifying his psychological responses to levels that threatened his sanity while providing motivation for the kind of devastating revenge that would characterize his final participation in the war. Achilles' mourning for Patroclus revealed the depth of their friendship while demonstrating the way that personal loss could transform even the most self-centered heroes into instruments of cosmic justice. Thetis' response to her son's grief involved commissioning new divine armor from Hephaestus, the god of smithcraft whose supernatural abilities could create equipment that exceeded even the previous set's capabilities. The new armor's construction incorporated materials and techniques that reflected the full extent of divine craftsmanship, its bronze surfaces decorated with scenes that depicted the entire cosmos, while its protective capabilities provided immunity to any mortal weapon. The shield's elaborate imagery served both artistic and practical purposes, as its supernatural construction could deflect attacks while its cosmic symbolism reminded viewers of the universal forces that governed heroic achievement. Achilles' return to combat transformed the siege's character from a prolonged stalemate into a series of devastating Greek victories that systematically eliminated Troy's most effective defenders. The son of Peleus fought with fury that exceeded his previous efforts, his divine armor and supernatural weapons allowing him to cut through Trojan formations like a force of nature rather than an individual warrior. His attacks targeted not only enemy combatants, but also the river Scamander itself when its divine spirit attempted to protect Trojan forces, the resulting battle between hero and river god demonstrating the cosmic scope that the conflict had achieved. The systematic destruction of Troy's allies and champions created the conditions for the final confrontation between Achilles and Hector, as the Trojan prince recognized that only his death could satisfy the Greek champion's desire for revenge, while understanding that his own survival remained essential for his city's continued defense. Their eventual duel occurred outside Troy's walls with both armies watching, the single combat's outcome determining not only the immediate tactical situation, but also the broader question of whether divine favour supported Greek or Trojan claims to justice. The battle between Achilles and Hector showcased the full extent of both warriors' capabilities, while highlighting the fundamental differences between divine and mortal heroism. Achilles fought with equipment and abilities that placed him beyond normal human limitations, his attacks possessing the kind of overwhelming force that could shatter conventional defences, while his protection rendered most counterattacks ineffective. Hector's resistance demonstrated exceptional courage and skill, but his mortal nature and conventional equipment could not bridge the gap between human excellence and divine favour that Achilles' heritage had created. Hector's death at Achilles' hands marked the beginning of Troy's final phase, as the city lost its most effective military leader, while the Greeks gained momentum that would eventually prove decisive. However, Achilles' treatment of Hector's corpse revealed the way that excessive grief and rage could corrupt even the noblest heroes, as his desecration of the fallen prince's body violated the codes of honour that normally governed heroic behaviour. The dragging of Hector's corpse around Troy's walls served Achilles' emotional needs, while offending both divine and mortal standards of appropriate conduct toward defeated enemies. The intervention of the gods to protect Hector's body from corruption, and Priam's successful appeal to Achilles for its return demonstrated that divine justice ultimately transcended individual desires for revenge. The old king's courage in entering the Greek camp alone to beg for his son's body created the emotional confrontation that finally restored Achilles' humanity, their shared grief over lost loved ones providing common ground that enabled mutual understanding despite their status as enemies. The ransom of Hector's body and the temporary truce for his funeral rites established precedents for honourable conduct that would influence later conflicts. Achilles' own death came shortly after his reconciliation with Priam, as Paris's arrow, guided by Apollo's divine intervention, struck the one vulnerable point in the hero's otherwise invincible body. The wound to Achilles' heel, the only part of his body that remained mortal due to the circumstances of his childhood invulnerability, ritual, proved immediately fatal despite its apparently minor nature. His death fulfilled the prophecy that had driven Thetis's attempts to prevent his participation in the war, while demonstrating that even the greatest heroes remained subject to fate and divine will. The funeral of Achilles created the kind of heroic spectacle that would be remembered and celebrated for generations, as Greeks and Trojans alike recognized the passing of the war's greatest individual warrior. The funeral games held in his honor attracted participation from surviving heroes who sought to demonstrate their own excellence while paying tribute to their fallen champion, the competition serving both as entertainment and as means of establishing new hierarchies among the remaining Greek leaders. The disputes over Achilles' armor and his other possessions revealed the competitive tensions that had been temporarily suppressed by respect for the dead hero. The war's continuation after Achilles' death required the Greeks to develop new strategies that did not depend on individual superhuman prowess, their eventual success coming through Odysseus' cunning rather than conventional military superiority. The construction of the Trojan horse represented the kind of indirect approach that Odysseus had advocated throughout the siege, its success demonstrating that intelligence and deception could achieve victories that brute force had failed to accomplish. The wooden horse's design incorporated both practical engineering and psychological manipulation, its appearance as a religious offering convincing the Trojans to bring it within their walls despite the obvious risks involved. Troy's destruction through the horse's stratagem ended the greatest conflict of the heroic age, while establishing patterns of victory and defeat that would influence later military thinking. The city's fall came not through the kind of direct assault that traditional heroic warfare emphasized, but through the exploitation of religious beliefs and cultural assumptions that made the defenders vulnerable to unconventional attacks. The massacre that followed Troy's capture demonstrated both the accumulated fury of 10 years of warfare and the breakdown of normal moral constraints that prolonged conflict could produce. The returns of the Greek heroes from Troy created new cycles of adventure and tragedy that would define the post-war period and establish the transition from the heroic age to more familiar historical periods. Odysseus' 10-year journey home became the archetypal story of heroic perseverance against supernatural obstacles. His encounters with monsters, gods, and magical beings providing a catalogue of the dangers that awaited travellers in a world where divine forces remained actively involved in mortal affairs. His adventures with the Cyclops Polyphemus, the sorceress Circe, the Sirens, and other supernatural entities demonstrated both the continuing presence of primordial dangers and the intellectual resources that heroes could employ to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The structure of Odysseus' return journey reflected the kind of episodic adventure that characterized much heroic literature, each encounter testing different aspects of the hero's capabilities while contributing to his overall development as a leader and survivor. His crew's gradual attrition through various disasters highlighted the costs of heroic adventure while emphasizing Odysseus' exceptional abilities as the only member of his expedition to reach home alive. The psychological and spiritual challenges he faced proved as demanding as the physical dangers, his encounters with the dead in Hades and his resistance to various forms of supernatural temptation, demonstrating the kind of moral strength that separated true heroes from mere warriors. Meanwhile, Agamemnon's return to Mycenae resulted in his assassination by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus, their conspiracy representing the domestic consequences of the king's decisions during the war. Clytemnestra's murder of her husband reflected both her desire for revenge over Iphigenia's sacrifice and her practical concerns about maintaining power during Agamemnon's extended absence. The assassination created new cycles of vengeance as Orestes, Agamemnon's son, eventually killed both his mother and Aegisthus to avenge his father's death, though this act of filial duty also constituted matricide that demanded its own punishment. The trial of Orestes before the Athenian court established important precedents for the resolution of blood feuds through legal rather than violent means. Athena's intervention in the proceedings demonstrating divine support for the development of more sophisticated approaches to justice. The transformation of the Furies into the Eumenides reflected the broader evolution from primitive vengeance to systematic law that would characterize the transition from heroic to classical periods. The establishment of formal legal procedures provided alternatives to the cycles of revenge that had characterized earlier generations, while maintaining respect for the moral principles that made justice necessary. The gradual decline of the heroic bloodlines occurred through various mechanisms that reflected both natural demographic processes and the specific challenges that heroic life created for family continuity. Many heroes died childless due to their early deaths in combat, or their dedication to adventures that prevented normal domestic life, while others produced offspring who lacked the exceptional qualities that had distinguished their parents. The dilution of divine heritage through successive generations reduced the supernatural abilities that had made the heroic age possible, as the children and grandchildren of heroes proved increasingly similar to ordinary mortals in their capabilities and limitations. The transformation of oral traditions into written literature began during the late heroic period, as communities sought to preserve the stories and achievements of their greatest figures for future generations. Homer's composition of the Iliad and Odyssey represented the culmination of centuries of oral tradition, while establishing literary forms that would influence storytelling for millennia to come. The epic poem's combination of historical memory with mythological elements created narratives that served both entertainment and educational purposes, their preservation of heroic values and achievements ensuring that later generations could learn from the experiences of their predecessors. Hesiod's Theogonian works and days provided different approaches to organizing and preserving traditional knowledge, the former focusing on divine genealogies and cosmic history, while the latter addressed practical concerns of agricultural and social life. These works demonstrated the range of subjects that early literature could address while establishing the authority of written texts over purely oral transmission. The development of writing systems capable of recording complex narratives marked a crucial transition in human cultural development, as communities gained the ability to preserve and transmit knowledge with unprecedented accuracy and detail. The influence of Greek mythology on subsequent literature, art, and cultural understanding proved both profound and enduring, as the stories and characters created during the heroic age provided templates for exploring universal human experiences and moral dilemmas. The psychological insights embedded in mythological narratives offered frameworks for understanding personality types, emotional conflicts, and social relationships that remained relevant long after the specific cultural context that had produced them had disappeared. The archetypal patterns represented by figures like Achilles, Odysseus, and Oedipus provided models for character development that influenced dramatic and literary traditions throughout the ancient world and beyond. The artistic representations of mythological subjects created visual vocabularies that enabled artists to communicate complex ideas and emotions through familiar symbolic systems. The standardization of divine and heroic iconography, facilitating cultural communication across linguistic and political boundaries. The development of dramatic forms based on mythological subjects provided venues for exploring philosophical and moral questions that might have been too controversial for direct treatment. The distance created by mythological settings, allowing audiences to consider challenging ideas without immediate personal or political implications. The psychological interpretation of mythological narratives, particularly as developed by modern analysts like Freud and Jung, demonstrated the continued relevance of ancient stories for understanding human behavior and mental processes. The identification of archetypal patterns in mythological narratives provided tools for analyzing both individual psychology and collective cultural phenomena, the universal elements in Greek myths suggesting fundamental aspects of human nature that transcended specific historical or cultural circumstances. The therapeutic applications of mythological interpretation offered new approaches to treating psychological disorders while validating the wisdom embedded in traditional narratives. The educational value of Greek mythology extended beyond its literary and artistic applications to encompass moral instruction and cultural transmission that helped societies maintain continuity with their historical foundations. The heroic examples provided by mythological figures offered models for behavior that emphasized courage, honor, justice, and perseverance, while warning against the dangers of pride, excess, and defiance of divine authority. The complex moral landscapes depicted in mythological narratives encourage critical thinking about ethical dilemmas while providing frameworks for understanding the consequences of various choices and actions. The scientific and philosophical developments that emerged from Greek culture drew heavily on mythological traditions while gradually developing more systematic approaches to understanding natural and human phenomena. The transition from mythological to rational explanations of natural events marked a crucial development in human intellectual history, though the underlying patterns of thought and the fundamental questions addressed remained remarkably consistent. The Greek achievement in creating both sophisticated mythological systems and rational philosophical methods demonstrated the compatibility between imaginative and analytical approaches to understanding reality. The legacy of Greek mythology in contemporary culture continues to manifest in literature, film, psychology, and popular entertainment, the enduring appeal of ancient stories demonstrating their continued relevance for modern audiences. The archetypal characters and situations created by Greek mythological traditions provide templates for storytelling that transcend specific cultural or historical contexts, their universal elements speaking to fundamental aspects of human experience that remain constant despite technological and social changes. The continued reinterpretation and adaptation of mythological narratives for contemporary audiences ensures that the wisdom and insights of the heroic age remain accessible to future generations, preserving the cultural achievements of ancient Greece while allowing them to evolve and develop new meanings appropriate for changing circumstances. Thus ended the heroic age, not with a single dramatic event but through the gradual transformation of exceptional individuals into legendary figures, whose stories would inspire and instruct humanity for millennia to come. The heroes themselves passed into history, but their achievements and the values they represented became permanent parts of human cultural heritage, their influence extending far beyond the specific times and places that had witnessed their original deeds. The mythological traditions that preserved their memory created bridges between ancient and modern worlds, ensuring that the lessons learned through heroic struggle and divine intervention would continue to guide human understanding of courage, justice, and the proper relationship between mortals and the cosmic forces that shape their destinies.